Deep within the mind's eye, Benjamin watches a scene of absurd contrast. Baron Gus, the formidable Blackrock lord, slumps by a bedside like a scolded bear, enduring a hoarse but fierce lecture from his wife, Lady Alina. Just moments ago, Gus had nearly cleaved the traveler Chesvia in two, but now he mutters awkward apologies, his face flushed with shame. Chesvia accepts the Baron's gratitude with a graceful smile, yet her true focus lies elsewhere. After a lavish dinner, she finds herself alone with Alina. The lady's elegant posture cannot hide her exhaustion. She stares at Chesvia's snow-white hair, seeking a silent confirmation before asking a trembling question: "What is your relationship with the Pale Church?" Chesvia's denial is absolute. "We are unrelated." Relieved, Alina reveals a harrowing truth. Her illness is no disease, it is a curse from the ancient wizard empire, a bloodline inheritance that has forced her family to flee the Pale Church's inquisitors for generations. She speaks of whispers in her dreams and a cold, distant call. In their shared consciousness, Chesvia translates the mysticism into cold reality for Benjamin. This isn't magic, it is a genetic code, a dominant trait in Alina but potentially recessive in thousands of others. Benjamin's voice grows grave as the realization hits: if this gene has spread through the population for centuries. How many people are walking time bombs, completely unaware of the filth sleeping in their blood? The answer lies far to the east, outside the Skinning Chapel. The air here reeks of incense and rot. Civil, an executioner of the Pale Crusade, stands over a massive pit. Below him, dozens of ragged souls huddle in despair. Black and white sparks leak from their eyes and mouths, the first signs of the curse's awakening. A soldier reports that the Pope of the Spirit Garden is still trying to protect these people, pleading for mercy. Civil's response is a chilling two-word sentence: "Bury it." As the dirt begins to fall, Civil looks toward the chapel's spire. His voice is devoid of emotion, a hollow sound in the twilight. "It won't be long," he whispers. "Once the firewood in the pit has burned out, the protective umbrella will fail." Chesvia had only just returned from Blackrock territory, her coat still dusted with snow, when Benjamin dropped the bombshell. He would not make the genetic curse public. Chesvia raised an eyebrow, her voice dripping with workplace sarcasm. She mocked his brilliant strategy, suggesting he should instead bang on a table and call for global unity. Benjamin scoffed. "Unity," he countered. "If we reveal this now, the alliance won't unite. It will devour itself." He leaned forward, his gaze sharp. He painted a grim picture, a kingdom where neighbors eye each other with suspicion, where husbands doubt their wives, and where 1,000 potential monsters become 1,000,000 in the eyes of a panicked public. It is like setting fire to a wheat field, he warned, and expecting only the weeds to burn. Trust would collapse, trade would break, and Frosttown, as the source of the news, would be the first sacrifice offered up by the church to quiet the riots. Chesvia's mockery faded, the weight of his logic was undeniable. "So," she asked quietly, "we just leave it?" "No," Benjamin replied, "we control what we can." He ordered a mandatory physical examination for all of Frosttown, disguised as a routine winter epidemic screening. Anyone found with the curse would be treated in absolute secrecy. To warn their allies without sparking a massacre, they would frame the early symptoms, the pale eyes and strange lethargy, as a mere infectious disease. Chesvia, ever the opportunist, feigned a mental block, until Benjamin generously offered her a $2.25 raise. "The boss is generous," she chirped, her wit returning instantly. She suggested they warn of atypical mood swings and aimless staring, subtle signs that wouldn't scream monster to a lynch mob. Meanwhile, miles away in Blackrock territory, the recovery was already beginning. Alina sat by a warm fireplace, her quill flying across parchment. When her husband, Gas, asked if she was writing thank-you notes, she shook her head. She was reaching out to old connections, searching for others hiding in the shadows, burdened by the same silent curse. She had found her salvation in Frosttown, and now she intended to lead others toward the light. The Blackwood Brothers Joint Industrial Park has become a sprawling heart of fire and iron. Under Gene Blackwood's management, the air is thick with the rhythmic thrum of blast furnaces and the relentless clanging of forging workshops. Recently, a quiet apprentice named Beecher joined the ranks. The boy is a prodigy, mastering complex gear lathes at an astonishing speed and offering ingenious improvements to the park's most sacred technology, the steam engines. However, Beecher's brilliance sparked suspicion in the manager, Rang. Fearing the boy was a spy sent to steal Frosttown's secrets, Rang decided to take action. One evening, Jean and a group of burly veterans cornered the young man. Jean's face was grim as he produced 5 bottles of Lingyuan Special Supply Happy Water, a liquor so potent it could make a dwarf tap dance. "Drink up," Jean commanded with a chilling smile. "If you finish these, you're one of us." Under pressure, Beecher downed the spirits. The effect was instant. Turning red as a lobster, the boy collapsed into a tearful confession. He wasn't a spy, but a refugee. His family had fled the western regions after his father was framed for the theft of military equipment. They came to Frosttown seeking a fresh start. Relieved, Jean's suspicion vanished. He realized he hadn't found a thief, he had found a genius. The next day, the two pored over blueprints. Beecher didn't just see machines, he saw weapons. He proposed a raw Dickel vision, steam-powered repeating crossbows and battering rams. This sparked a long-dormant fire in Jean. He gathered his elite engineers and locked them in a high-security workshop with one goal: to build a steam-powered ballista of unparalleled power. They wanted to give their leader, Benjamin, a hardcore surprise. Late one night, Benjamin sat in his office, exhausted from political affairs. He raised a cup of tea to his lips when suddenly, boom. A massive, ground-shaking roar erupted from the industrial park. It wasn't thunder. It sounded like a structural collapse. Benjamin's teacup shattered on the floor. He stood abruptly, his heart racing with a single, terrifying thought: an enemy attack. Is Frosttown being bombed? The good news was that Frosttown had not been bombarded by the enemy. The bad news, the explosion that nearly scared Benjamin's heart out of his chest, was caused by his own brother. The official statement blamed ice buildup and steam pipe fatigue, a respectable lie to maintain stability, but the truth was far uglier. In a deserted workshop, Benjamin's face was ashen as he roared at a row of dejected workers. At the front stood Gene Blackwood, his head wrapped in bandages, his face marked by raw, red burns. Others stood with arms in slings, trembling under Benjamin's fury. "Are you out of your minds?" Benjamin's voice echoed off the cold walls. "Is weapon design a game of gut feelings? Where are the pressure tests? Did you drink the safety procedures with your alcohol?" He turned his wrath toward Jean. "And you are a minister, Jean, not a mad sheep leading a flock off a cliff. Has your judgment been suffocated by the steam?" Jean's lips trembled, but he couldn't speak. The memory of that night was a waking nightmare. They had been pushing the core boiler of a prototype steam crossbow to its absolute limit. They ignored the vibrations. They ignored the metallic screeches. Until the boiler lid shot into the sky like a giant's discus, tearing through the roof and vanishing into the night. Then came the white light and the scalding high-pressure steam. If Benjamin hadn't sent investigators immediately, and if Chesvia's healing magic hadn't been there to treat the horrific burns, every master craftsman in Frosttown would be dead. Chesvia leaned against the door, her expression cold. She had saved their lives, but she had no sympathy for fools. "Benjamin, Lord," Jean stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "This is my fault. I gave the orders. Dismiss me, fine me, just don't blame the others." Benjamin's eyes were ice. "Do you think your life is worth the next 10 years of our technological progress? I am also to blame for trusting you too much." Those words cut deeper than any insult. Jean's eyes reddened, his voice choking with emotion. "No, it's not your fault, I promise. It will never happen again." Benjamin finally announced the penalties: 3 months lost wages, mandatory safety training, and Jean's demotion from minister to deputy. It was a harsh lesson, but a fair one. As the bruised men filed out, only Jean and the young apprentice, Beecher, remained. Benjamin looked at them, his anger finally cooling into a heavy silence. "Now," Benjamin said, extending his hand, "hand over the blueprints for this steam ballista, and whatever is left of that prototype." The Frosttown supply convoy, led by Sergeants Jeffrey and Pietro, had grown like a rolling snowball. By the time they reached the city of Hearthheart, their wagons groaned under the weight of medicine and winter gear. But here, in the soot-stained air of Ironforge, they were to receive their most vital expansion. Lady Ella of Hearthheart personally commanded the yard. With a sharp flick of her hand, she directed the loading of finely crafted swords, armor-piercing arrows, and heavy crates of explosives marked ironclad new dust crystals. "Don't take the shortcut," Ella warned, her voice tight with authority. A swarm of deadborn has choked the mountain pass. Take the western trade route instead. It adds half a day to the journey, but it is safer." To the sergeant's utter shock, Ella didn't just provide steel, she provided men. 500 ironborn soldiers, disciplined and gleaming in heavy plate, marched into formation. "My goal is not to cower behind walls," Ella declared. "We have raised this army for 1,000 days, and today we use it to take back the capital." But the surprises weren't over. Ella pointed toward a massive training field where a dark, indescribable mass of people waited. There were nearly 5,000 of them. This was no regular army. It was a motley sea of tattered robes, wandering knights, and farmers clutching pitchforks. "They call it a holy war," Ella whispered with a hint of admiration. "They came from every corner of the kingdom, driven by piety and fervor." Jeffrey scanned the chaotic crowd until his eyes locked onto a man standing alone at the front. He wore a worn-out robe, yet he stood as steady as a mountain. Beneath his hood, a shock of deep-sea blue hair caught the light. Jeffrey stepped forward with a hearty smile. "Hey, brother, we're from the west, heading to Stone Cliff. Let's look out for each other." The man turned, his gaze was sharp, piercing. "Are you from Frosttown?" he asked. His voice was calm, yet it carried an undeniable weight. "I am Jeffrey," the sergeant replied. "And you?" The man pulled back his hood, revealing a face carved from stone. "Gallon," he said simply, "from the Church of Lingyuan." Gallon turned to the restless thousands and asked one word: "Ready." Suddenly, a massive horn blast, low and mournful, shattered the air. The 5,000 pilgrims began to move as one, a slow, overwhelming torrent of faith and steel. Jeffrey waved his arm, signaling the wagons and the ironborn soldiers to fall in. The wheels rumbled, the frozen earth trembled, and the great coalet iron began its long march into the teeth of the north. Calvin was a born warrior. To him, the word lose was a foreign concept, a softness reserved for children's play. He had come to the blood-soaked front lines of Stone Cliff territory to prove, once again, that he was the kingdom's sharpest and most unbreakable sword. But now, everything was a blur of cold liquid. He couldn't tell if it was blood, snow, or mud. Each breath felt like swallowing burning embers. His lungs convulsed, and his ears were filled with the heavy, bellows-like rhythm of his own struggling heart. Driven by pure instinct, Calvin twisted his body and lashed out. Snap! His blade severed bone and armor, cutting a lunging figure in two. But in that same heartbeat, bang, an irresistible force slammed into his chest. It wasn't a weapon, it felt like being rammed by a charging beast. His fine steel breastplate groaned and caved in. Calvin was sent flying, arcing through the air before crashing into a collapsed earth wall dozens of meters away. He rolled through the mud, carving a long furrow in the frozen ground. Cough, he choked on a mouthful of blood. His vision went black, his internal organs shifting from the impact. But he was alive. With trembling hands, he ripped off his deformed helmet filled with blood and vomit and tossed it aside. The freezing air, thick with the stench of burnt flesh and rotting corpses, rushed into his lungs, momentarily clearing his muddled mind. The world rushed back in a brutal cacophony, the howling wind, the clanging of metal, and the inhuman roars of monsters. Suddenly, call out, a sharp whistling tore through the air. Calvin rolled awkwardly as a heavy infantry spear thudded into the ground where he had just lain, its shaft vibrating violently. He lifted his blood-covered eyes. 100 meters away, 20 riders approached. At their head was a warhorse of the deadborn, wreathed in ghastly white flames. The rider wore the armor of a Kingdom Legion commander, a symbol of honor now twisted by bizarre, ever-growing growths. Calvin didn't lament, he didn't have the energy. He felt only a pure, white-hot fighting spirit. As the Deathborn Knights began their silent, terrifying charge, Calvin roared. He gripped his hilt and unleashed the full power of his mind blade. The heavens are collapsing. An invisible gravitational field slammed down. Leading horses buckled, crashing to their knees. Calvin launched himself into the chaos. Outnumbered, the concept didn't exist. He moved with the precision of gears, cleaving armor and bone, parrying spears and crushing helmets until the filth splattered the snow. But human strength has its limits. A sharp pain shot through his shoulder. He looked down to see a lance tip protruding through his armor. He was surrounded. As the enemy prepared to lift him and trample him beneath their hooves, Calvin prepared one final, desperate maneuver. But the impact never came. Strong arms ka. At him in midair, Calvin's cloudy vision focused on a familiar face, the mortuary bishop Camus. "You," Calvin tried to scold him, but the blood loss choked his words. Behind Camus, a crowd of monks and believers rushed past, charging the elite knights like moths to a flame. "That's suicide," Calvin whispered. He watched in horror as the cultivators were cut down like stalks of wheat by the ruthless, efficient monsters. Calvin stopped struggling. As Camus dragged him toward the shadows of the ruins, his consciousness began to fade. He looked up at the gray sky and saw enormous black shadows tearing through the clouds, corrupted dragons heading south. Ironforge Frosttown. He tried to hold on to the thought, "My soldiers are still fighting, I can't fall here," but his body, the vessel of his pride and rage, had finally reached its limit. The candle flickered, and the world went dark. Inside the Lord's office in Frosttown, the air is thick with the scent of ink and old parchment. Benjamin abruptly stops writing, his heart clenching as if gripped by an invisible hand. Across the desk, Chesvia is casually practicing finger dexterity by balancing 6 empty ceramic cups. She glances at him, noting his furrowed brow. Benjamin presses his fingers to his temples, whispering that a dark fluctuation is coming from the Stone Cliff territory. Chesvia isn't worried, she's intrigued. She tells him his psychic radar is simply sharpening. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she tosses all 6 cups into the air. She challenges him to test his focus. The cups begin to fall, but they don't shatter. Instead, they slow down as if crashing into an invisible gel. They float at varying heights, held steady by Benjamin's mind. A kettle nearby lifts itself, pouring water into each suspended cup without a single splash. Benjamin even forces the liquid to rise, forming delicate, crystalline water bridges between the floating vessels. Chesvia smirks, crossing her arms. She jokes that soon he won't even need railcars for business trips. Suddenly, bang! The office door is flung open. Walter strides in, his face grimmer than ever before. The sudden interruption breaks Benjamin's concentration. The water bridges collapse with a heavy asterisk whoosh asterisk, and the cups clatter onto the thick carpet. "My lord, urgent military intelligence," Walter gasps. Small groups of undead are attacking outlying villages. Even worse, unidentifiable giant flying creatures have been spotted sweeping across the southern skies at extreme speeds. Benjamin stands so quickly his chair screeches against the floor. He realizes the destination immediately. The monsters are coming for the organs of the goddess of magic hidden in the mountains behind Frosttown. Walter hesitates, mentioning that some advisors suggest hunkering down and ignoring their neighbors. Benjamin sneers at the idea. If they stand by while their allies die, their union is worthless. He begins barking orders. "Walter, establish multi-layered defensive lines in the back mountains immediately. Push the lines outward to keep the fighting away from the civilians." He continues, "I will personally go to the Blackrock and Silverstream territories to rally reinforcements. We will organize a mobile force to ambush these monsters on the road." Finally, he orders Diona to assemble the mountain guerrillas, equipped with their newest experimental weapons. "Let's take action immediately." Walter salutes and rushes out. Silence returns to the room, save for the sound of water soaking into the carpet. Chesvia picks up a clean cup and takes a slow sip. "It seems," she says softly, "that our leisurely practice is over." Joining Celia's hero squad was once the most precious experience of Finn's life. Back then, ideals were as bright as the rising sun. The group was a tapestry of worlds colliding, noble princesses like Celia, proud knights like Calvin and Ella, and souls like Benjamin, who had clawed his way out of the dust of serfdom. They argued until their faces were red, yet they were bound by a sincere vision that the world could be better. Finn remembers Calvin and Ella, nobles who were arrogant to their superiors but never to the weak. And then there was Benjamin, a man born as livestock who possessed a wisdom that saved the team from countless disasters. Finn had taught the boy to read, while Benjamin taught Finn the harsh realities of human nature. And at the center of it all was Celia, the compassionate leader who wept for disaster-stricken children. But reality is a cold splash of water, extinguishing every warm memory. Now the South is in chaos. Finn's rebels fighting for the oppressed have clashed head-on with 5,000 garrison troops led by Celia herself. In the damp quagmire of the Green River lands, the war has turned into a nightmare. Celia, desperate to reach the capital, has no more patience for rebels blocking her path. She draws her sword, subjugation, an extension of the goddess of law's will. As she raises the silver blade, she declares a judgment that shatters the air. According to the law, he should be executed. The effect is instantaneous. An invisible force field, the execution domain, crushes the hearts of the rebels. Finn watches in horror as his men collapse in agony, their courage stripped away by divine weight. Conversely, Celia's soldiers are invigorated, charging with a terrifying, supernatural fury. Through the mist, Finn sees the woman he once loved harvesting his friends like wheat. "Finn, run!" screams his lieutenant, Thiolan, but before the warning can finish, a silver blade pierces Thiolan's chest. He falls, his eyes turning a blank grayish-white. Celia withdraws her sword, flicking the blood from the steel as if it were a trivial stain. She doesn't even look at the body. "Celia!" Finn roars, a sound of pure, inhuman agony. He stares at the silver-armored figure, the woman who once represented D-Hope, now a cold engine of slaughter. As their eyes meet, Finn finds no warmth, no recognition, only the freezing indifference of the law. It is a mess, a mess, a mess. Celia Windsor, once a goddess of law on the battlefield, now resembles a frightened beast curled in its den. She sits alone on a makeshift cot, her magnificent silver armor tossed aside, stained with mud and dark red blood. She is trembling. She can still hear it, that roar of intent piercing the clamor of war. She can still see those eyes, Finn's eyes. They used to hold warmth and trust, but now they hold nothing but hatred. He has vanished into the deep forests of the Green River land, and Celia knows he will not let this go. She covers her face with icy fingers, overwhelmed by a wave of panic. She had deceived herself, believing Finn was merely misunderstood or blinded by ambition. She thought that if she just explained the crisis in the capital, he would stand by her side, but she messed it up. She killed his men, farmers in tattered leather wielding pitchforks, and she watched them fall beneath her army's iron hooves. "What to do?" she whispers. "Benjamin, right, Benjamin. The name is a lifeline. Benjamin is intelligent. He could mediate. He could fix this." She lunges at her table, her hands shaking as she dips a quill into ink. "Benjamin, my dear friend, I need your help." But halfway through, the pen stops. A dark blot of ink spreads across the paper. A new fear takes hold. How could she let Benjamin see her like this, like a pathetic, disorganized girl? And worse, if he knew the whole story, whose side would he take? The thought sends a chill down her spine. A garrison officer interrupts her spiral, saluting as he enters the tent. "Your Highness, we have custody of the captured, wounded, and the rebel families. What should be done with them?" "Who said we were going to dispose of them?" Celia snaps, her voice sharp with agitation. "Don't hurt them, do you hear me?" She strides out of the tent toward the edge of the camp. Behind a makeshift wooden fence, hundreds of elderly men, women, and children are crammed together. They are emaciated, their eyes filled with a deep, simmering hostility. Celia falters. Reason demands she be ruthless to deter further rebellion, but her heart screams that they are innocent. She tries to imagine Benjamin's voice urging her toward mercy. But as she passes a 5-year-old boy, he breaks from his mother's arms. He points a tiny finger directly at her. "It was you," the child shrieks, his voice shrill with pure, direct sadness. "You killed my father, I saw it." The mother lunges to cover his mouth, sobbing, begging for mercy, but it is too late. Every eye in the camp is fixed on the princess. That childish accusation, that mother's terrified plea, it is the final blow. In Celia's mind, the string that had been stretched to its limit snaps completely. The celebration of victory lasted only one night. In the early hours of the next day, while most soldiers were still lost in a drunken sleep, a massive fire erupted without warning. The flames roared through the rear of the camp, fueled by dry hay and grain sacks that seemed, suspiciously, doused in oil. By the time the panicked men organized, the sky was a bruised, angry red. As the gray light of dawn illuminated the scorched earth, the quartermaster nearly wept. The provisions meant to sustain 5,000 men for half a month were gone. Charred wheat and bitter ash were all that remained. The investigation was swift, multiple points of origin and grease-soaked rags. It was arson, the work of the hidden resistance. With one match, the rebels had strangled the victorious army. "Requisition from the nearby villages," an officer barked. "We are the Grand Duke's garrison, it is our right." But the kingdom's law met a wall of human defiance. The soldiers returned from the villages disheveled and empty-handed. They reported that the peasants had hidden their grain in cellars, walls, even latrines. When the name of the esteemed Princess Celia was mentioned, the people did not bow, they spat. They stood in their doorways with hoes and sickles, looking at the soldiers not as liberators, but as a plague. The Grand Duke's supervisor stepped forward, his voice steady yet heavy with pressure. "Your Highness," he said, looking at the silent princess, "these people are in league with the rebels. You must use your reputation. Go to them as Cecilia, the hero they once loved. Persuade them to cooperate." But Celia sat like a delicate statue devoid of its soul. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes vacant, staring at a map she did not see. The accusations of a child and the departing gaze of her friend, Finn, had finally broken her. Her head-maid knelt, taking Celia's cold hand. "Your Highness, please, we have embarked on this path, there is no turning back." She pleaded with her, invoking the names of Celia's comrades, Calvin, Ella, and Benjamin, all fighting bitter battles elsewhere. "They need you, the kingdom needs you, do not let this army collapse." At last, a ripple of life, Celia's focus sharpened. "Everyone still needs me," she whispered, her voice dry as bone. She took a deep breath, trying to straighten her back, forcing a spark of light into her eyes. She could not fall, not yet. But just as she mustered the strength to rise, a whisper, cold and fleeting, echoed from the darkest corner of her mind. "No one needs you." Celia stiffened, and in an instant, the determination she had fought so hard to find vanished into the cold wind. Inside the rugged halls of Black Rock territory, Benjamin and Gus sit hunched over a wooden table. A map of the kingdom stretched between them like a battlefield. Benjamin's finger traces the marked nodes of the realm. He doesn't waste time with pleasantries. "Gus," he says, his voice steady and direct, "we need you." Yeah. Gus leans back in his high-backed chair, his massive hands resting on the armrests. He admits he doesn't like owing favors, but the subtext is clear, there is room for a deal. "Tell me directly," Gus demands. "How many people, where is the attack, and how long will it take? The swords of Black Rock are not drawn for nothing." Benjamin smiles. He knows Gus is an indispensable ally, but Gus isn't looking for flattery. He wants technology. He wants the fast-growing, frost-resistant seeds and those new toys, the explosives, that Benjamin's people have created. Benjamin laughs, promising that their cooperation will soon make the old fox, Irwin of Silverstream, weep with envy. The atmosphere relaxes, but only for a moment. Benjamin zooms in on the map. The Deadborn are spreading. He points to the territories under threat, places lacking mobile support. "We must launch a preemptive strike," Benjamin insists. "We choose the terrain, we ambush them on the road to the capital, and we disrupt their rhythm." Gus nods, his eyes squinting as he memorizes the routes. "That suits me perfectly," he grunts. "I won't sit in a castle waiting to be beaten." Across the room, a second negotiation is unfolding. Sullivan and Lady Alina are finalizing the joint defense agreement. Despite her pale face, Alina is sharp, holding her own against the shrewd administrator to secure the best terms for her people. Gus watches her with a flash of pride before leaning in close to Benjamin. His voice drops. "As for the western frontier, Alkia won't be coming. He's tied up in a bloody mess with the elves and dwarves. He's protecting his own bridgehead. He won't risk his neck for the royal territory." Benjamin frowns, disappointed by the crown prince's lack of righteousness. Gus scoffs at the word. To him, righteousness is worthless compared to steel and land. Even the religious volunteers of the Holy War Army are nothing but a rabble in his eyes. "And the Pale Church?" Benjamin asks, his expression darkening. "They are the state religion, they have the power, why are they holding back?" Gus shrugs, leaning forward until he is staring directly into Benjamin's eyes. "I've learned one thing over the years," he says, his voice a low warning. "Those who speak more eloquently than bards can never be trusted, especially when you really need them." The Holy Spring territory, the crown jewel of the Pale Church. Here the air is thick with the scent of incense and an almost suffocating sense of piety. While the world outside drowns in the blood and fire of the deadborn monsters, this land remains a silent, untouched sanctuary. To the believers huddled beneath the towering spire of the Pale Cathedral, this peace is a divine gift, a sign that even the most abhorrent beasts dare not offend the majesty of the Pale Goddess. Inside the cathedral, solemn hymns echo under the great dome. Hundreds of pilgrims pray in the flickering candlelight, their faces washed with the relief of those who have narrowly escaped a catastrophe. But then the silence is shattered. Asterisk boom. A deafening roar rips through the holy stillness. Near the entrance, the thick stone wall explodes inward in a cloud of choking dust and debris. Several church guards are hurled through the breach like tattered sacks, groaning as they collapse onto the floor. Through the settling smoke, a figure strides into the light. It is Yolia, the young bishop of the Church of the Spirit Garden, but the man standing there is not the gentle soul he once was. His hair is disheveled, his robes are stained with mud and blood, and his eyes burn with a fury more intense than any altar candle. His gaze pierces the room, locking onto Sister Livia, the administrator of this territory and a former member of the legendary hero squad. Why not go and support the other territories? Yolia's voice is low, yet it vibrates with a rage that shakes the very foundations of the church. Why are you just watching? For weeks, Yolia had pleaded for a holy war against the monsters. He had been arrested, imprisoned, and labeled a heretic for trying to unite the people. He had waited in a cold cell, hoping his old comrade Livia would listen, but she never came. While Yolia was forced into labor in the fields, he watched the horizon. He saw the flying monsters sweep across the sky like omens of death, burning the neighboring lands to ash. And yet, the Holy Spring territory did nothing. No soldiers were sent, no refugees were welcomed. The string in Yolia's heart has finally snapped. He stands now in the center of the sanctuary, his chest heaving, surrounded by the terrified gasps of the faithful. He has broken his chains, fought through the guards, and smashed down the walls, all for one purpose. He stares at Livia, demanding the one thing the Pale Church refuses to give, an answer. The confusion boiling inside Yolia finally erupted into pure destruction. The guards of the Pale Cathedral, men who usually intimidated the common folk, were as fragile as straw before him. Yolia's power was not flashy. He used no dazzling lights or complex spells, only the purest, most brutal force. By condensing his nen into a single point, he unleashed invisible shockwaves through his fists, a simplicity made terrifying by his rage. A squad of 10 apostles formed a shield wall, leveling their halberds to stop his advance. Yolia didn't even flinch. He lowered his center of gravity, clenched his right fist, and released a transparent ripple of energy. Boom! The formation shattered, men in shields were tossed like autumn leaves, crashing into stone pillars and wooden benches. They collapsed in silence, powerless to halt his path. Yolia's gaze locked onto Sister Livia, who stood motionless in the distance. But as he stepped forward, a new figure blocked his way, Percival. The cathedral knight stood ready, his iris shield held high as crack. Cling, pale white electricity danced along his blade. Percival was a chosen one, a warrior wielding the lightning of the pale goddess herself. The two clashed in a blur of sparks and shattered stone. Yolia's brutal shockwaves neutralized the leaping electric snakes, but the stalemate drained his momentum. In a final, desperate act of defiance, Yolia roared, ignoring a bolt of lightning to throw his fastest strike directly at Livia. The shockwave, powerful enough to split mountains, hit an invisible crystal wall just inches from Livia's face. It dissipated into nothing, not even stirring a single hair on her head. Stunned, Yolia was swarmed. Elite guards tackled him to the cold marble floor, pinning him under heavy chains. Pressing his cheek against the stone, Yolia screamed his question, "Answer me, the kingdom is burning, and you just stand by and watch. Why?" Percival sheathed his sword and leaned down, whispering coldly into Yolia's ear, "There is no particular reason. Sister Livia simply chose the church over the kingdom." While the cathedral fell into a grim silence, the atmosphere at Lord Elwyn's residence in Silverstream was one of frantic ambition. Elwyn Hawthorne, his face beaming with greed and approval, listened to Benjamin Blackwood's plan to combat the deadborn threat. "Great idea, I fully support it," Elwyn exclaimed. The merchant lord was no fool, he saw the profit in protection. He offered wagons, manpower, and supplies, eager to push the front lines away from his own borders. He looked at Benjamin with growing admiration. The young man had already delivered cold-resistant seeds that were sprouting in the frozen earth. A miracle that proved Benjamin was the ultimate investment. Elwyn stood, leaving the logistics to his daughter, Lena. He had hands to shake and markets to manipulate. Unbeknownst to the rest of the realm, Silverstream had become the kingdom's economic heartbeat. Where Elwyn invested, the world followed, and today, he was betting everything on the young baron. Deep in the Green River Valley, a damp hideout lies concealed by dense vines and jagged rock walls. This is the final refuge for the remnants of Finn's guerrilla force. They are a defeated army huddled in the swamp like frightened birds waiting for the inevitable. Inside a cramped log cabin, Finn sits alone. He clutches a charcoal drawing, a simple sketch of his former companions, Calvin, Ella, Benjamin, and Celia. Once this was his most cherished memory. Now it feels like a red-hot branding iron against his soul. Finn slams his fist onto the rough wooden table. Nobles, royalty, he spits the words through clenched teeth. They treat people like us as playthings, to be discarded at will. He had known this truth, but it took the cold steel of a sword through a friend's chest to truly wake him up. A scout slips into the room, reporting a successful night raid. They have burned the enemy's grain supplies, but the Vict Ori is hollow. The scout reveals that Princess Celia personally intervened to seize food from local villagers. Finn raises a hand, silencing him. He can already picture it, the hero princess using her status to snatch the last rations from the mouths of the starving. "We must leave," Finn commands, his eyes bloodshot. "Leave no trace." He rolls up the drawing not for nostalgia but as a grim reminder of betrayal. Meanwhile, a heavy silence hangs over the princess. Celia feels as though a thick, wet cloth is wrapped around her face, suffocating her. Her intervention worked, but the villagers' eyes were like invisible blades scraping across her skin. She has enough grain to last 4 days, enough for one final blow. She tells herself she cannot hesitate, even if she must face Finn again. After a grueling march through vicious traps, Celia's garrison finally reaches the rebel camp, only to find it empty. The campfires are cold ashes. The rebels have vanished into the swamp they know so well. An officer curses in frustration, but Celia stands in the center of the clearing, overwhelmed by a wave of helplessness. They are playing a game she cannot win. Then, a spark of relief flickers in her mind. The rebellion is broken, the territories are restored. Finn is no longer a threat to the crown. "Pass down the order," she announces to her officers. "The army will rest for half a day, then we return to base. The rebellion is over." Celia surveyed the empty camp, her boots echoing as she entered the largest wooden hut. Inside, the guerrillas' meeting table was impeccably clean, a stark contrast to the chaos of their retreat, but in the center sat a row of rough wooden plaques, arranged with the chilling precision of a ritual. Celia hesitated, then reached out to pick one up. The charcoal strokes were crooked yet forceful. It read, "Cole died at the hands of Princess Celia Windsor's justice. He was once a farmer who fought against heavy taxes. May he never suffer hunger again." Her hand trembled. She grabbed another, then another. Theron, Finn's right-hand man, dead for Celia's justice. Rabbi, a mother trampled by the garrison, dead for Celia's justice. Each plaque was a name, a biography, and a direct accusation. Celia's knuckles turned white as she gripped the wood. Was this Finn's plan to shake her resolve with guilt? "Naive," a cold voice echoed in her heart. "If you hadn't betrayed the kingdom, you would still be alive." She slammed the sign back onto the table with a sharp asterisk, snap asterisk. "I must not waver," she whispered to herself. "I am right." But fate, as it often does, delivered a cruel mockery. Shortly after Celia ordered her troops to rest, a sudden riot of agony broke out. Hundreds of soldiers collapsed simultaneously, their faces turning a sickly bluish purple as they vomited in the dirt. "The water," the medic cried, pointing a trembling finger at the crystal-clear well. "It's poison. From the southern swamps there is no antidote." Desperate for a clean source, Celia led her guards to a nearby stream, but the sight she found there nearly froze her blood. 10 of her soldiers were suspended from the branches, swaying gently in the breeze. Their armor had been stripped away, and painted in dark red across their bare chests were the words, "This is just the beginning." A shiver of pure powerlessness shot through her. This wasn't a retreat, it was a declaration. As the physical poison took hold in the camp, a different kind of smoke began to spread across the kingdom, the smoke of rumor. In taverns and markets, the legend of the radiant Cecilia was being systematically dismantled. People whispered that she had become a cold-blooded butcher, a mere blade for the power-hungry Grand Duke Upton. They said the 7 knights were dead, shattered by her betrayal of their ideals. When Grand Duke Upton finally issued a decree praising her iron-blooded success, it only sealed her fate. The rumors and the official praise merged into a single devastating label. The radiant Cecilia was gone, replaced by a new name that would haunt the South, the Iron-Blooded Princess. Rumors of the 7 nights of Celia and Finn swept toward Frostshire like a sudden gale, but Benjamin had no time to listen. He stood atop the newly built watchtower, his hair whipped by a howling wind, eyes fixed on the horizon. Those were not clouds, they were wings, tattered, leathery membranes belonging to the aerial units of the Deadborn. They moved with irrational speed. Some swooped like vultures upon smoking chimneys, bringing slaughter to the villages below. But the larger, more focused monsters ignored the screams, marching through the sky toward a single objective, the 7th resurrection facility in the mountains behind Frost Town. Crossbow bolts whistled through the air and dust crystals bloomed into charred flowers against the gray sky. Most of the undead swept past the town with cold indifference, but then the clouds tore open. A giant dragon appeared, its shadow expanding like a shroud of death. Primal fear seized the soldiers, weapons felt like lead in their trembling hands. "Hold your ground, heed my command," Walter's roar cut through the panic. As the beast descended toward the ruins, Walter swung his arm down. "Fire!" Heavy ballistae screamed. 2 experimental steam-powered ballistae unleashed metal projectiles at terrifying speeds. The world vanished in a roar of flames and shattered scales. The dragon's forelimb snapped, its wing was shredded into ribbons. With a deafening thud, the apex predator crashed to the earth. The soldiers cheered, but the victory was fleeting. The sky remained thick with monsters. It became a brutal war of attrition, consuming arrows, crystals, and courage. Benjamin moved tirelessly among the lines, his voice hoarse as he stood upon the heights. "Look at your hands," he shouted. "Your strength brought that beast down. The spines of Frosttown are harder than mountains." Behind the lines, Chesvia worked miracles. With her medical skill and the power of her mind blade, she reattached severed limbs and closed gaping wounds before the soldiers' eyes. Beside her stood Evelyn, who had recently discovered her own strange gift, the ability to split her consciousness into 2 independent bodies. One Evelyn stood guard by Benjamin while the other assisted Chesvia. Suddenly, the Evelyn in the clinic winced. "The damage is not shared," she whispered. "My other self," her arm was just crushed by a collapsing ballista. Chesvia didn't hesitate. She grabbed her supplies to rush to the front. As they neared the command post, Walter, covered in soot and blood, saw them and waved them back frantically. "Go back, it's dangerous." "Evelyn's arm is broken," Chesvia screamed over the roar of explosions. "I have to set it." Walter looked at the perfectly healthy Evelyn standing right next to the doctor. "Nonsense, her arm is fine." "The other Evelyn," Chesvia shouted, making a splitting motion with her hands. "Mind blade, there are 2. Walter froze, a flash of realization and pure envy crossing his face. He had prayed to the goddess for a mind blade every day, yet he remained a mere mortal. With a grunt, he pointed them toward the emergency exit and turned back to the sky, gripping his sword tight, ready to face the inhuman terror with nothing but his own iron will. "Aphrodite," Benjamin's roar sliced through the sudden silence following the explosion. "Help me lift this damn ballista." A heavy steam ballista had overturned in the impact, its twisted metal and broken timbers pinning Evelyn beneath the wreckage. Thorns burst from the ground, emitting a teeth-grinding sound as they entwined around the scorching metal. Aphrodite stood nearby, brow furrowed, hands raised in a gesture of intense focus. Like extensions of his own limbs, the resilient vines slowly heaved the heavy wreckage upward. Benjamin lunged forward, grabbing Evelyn's uninjured arm and dragging her from the rubble. Her left arm hung at an unnatural angle, completely broken. "Don't worry," Evelyn gasped, her voice eerily calm. "Chesvia is on her way. My other self is bringing her here." Benjamin didn't have time to process her words. A dozen humanoid shadows emerged from the forest, rushing the fortifications. "Where did these things come from?" he cursed. With a sharp thought, he summoned 4 slender longswords. Controlled by his mind, they transformed into streaks of silver light, severing the limbs of the undead in precise, whistling arcs. Beside him, Aphrodite's thorns surged, piling into a moving wall 2 people high. The barrier writhed like a swarm of living snakes, piercing and flinging away any monster that dared approach. Just then, Chesvia arrived with the second Evelyn. She knelt immediately, her hands moving in a blur, with a soft clicking sound and a supper. Essie'd grown from Evelyn, translucent threads slid beneath the skin, stitching bone back together. "When will this end?" Chesvia asked, looking up at Benjamin. Benjamin didn't answer. He closed his eyes, pushing his mental perception to the absolute limit. Invisible ripples swept across Frosttown and into the distant mountains. The sky was clearing, the immediate threat was fading. "Take over out here," Benjamin ordered Aphrodite. He turned to Sesvia, pointing to his temple. "Hold on for me, I need to keep the radar on and it's draining my energy." Sesvia placed a hand on his shoulder, funneling a cool, gentle warmth into him. "I'm a human soothing agent, not a battery," she muttered, though her touch remained steady. As the clamor of battle subsided, the weight of the world returned. Evelyn approached Benjamin in a quiet corner. She spoke of the south, of rumors that Princess Celia had turned her blade against their former comrade, Finn. Civil war had erupted among the legendary Seven Glorious Knights. Benjamin listened in a stony silence, his fists clenching. Celia and Finn, his companions, his friends, how could they tear the kingdom apart while the world burned? He struggled to maintain his composure, his mind reeling from the betrayal of the bond they once shared. "Continue to monitor them," Benjamin commanded, his voice tight. "I need facts, not rumors." But Evelyn wasn't finished. Her voice dropped to a somber whisper. "There is one more thing. The front lines at Stonecliff have fallen. Lord Calvin led the final charge. He is missing. His fate is unknown." In an instant, Benjamin felt the world go black. The offensive against Frosttown has finally ceased. When the last raven-like undead was blasted apart by a heavy crossbow bolt, and the soldiers finished off the monsters trapped by Aphrodite's thorns, the chilling flapping of wings in the gray sky fell silent. Cheers erupted across the defensive line. "We won, we held on." The soldiers embraced, their weary faces lit by genuine smiles. They had repelled a legendary dragon and withstood an onslaught from both sky and ground. This was a true victory for the Frost Guard. However, inside the command post, the atmosphere was the complete opposite of the jubilation outside. Benjamin's face was covered in dust, his expression grim. Standing before him were his core confidants, all except Diona, who remained on support duty. There was no celebration here, only the heavy weight of a series of devastating reports. "Celia and Finn have clashed in the south. Worse still, Calvin's whereabouts are unknown, his fate uncertain." To Benjamin, this news was like a dust bomb dropped into his mental world. While Calvin fought a bloody battle against the Deadborn, Celia and Finn were busy with internal strife. It was unforgivably short-sighted. Benjamin's jaw clenched. How could he find the kingdom's foremost knight from 1,000 miles away in this chaos? If Stonecliff territory had truly fallen, the kingdom's heartland was now wide open to the undead tide. Evelyn's intelligence plunged Walter and Suleiman into a long silence. Finally, Benjamin spoke. "Arguing cannot change the status quo. We must speed up our preparations." Walter looked up, his voice filled with worry. "The soldiers need a goal, Baron. They need direction." "Then give it to them," Benjamin decided. "I will give a public speech. Everyone must understand what we are protecting." It was then that Sullivan spoke, his gaze piercingly intense. "Sir, I suggest we stop being passive. Look at the kingdom. The dukes are preoccupied and the heirs are busy with private struggles. Who gives the people hope? It is us. It is Frosttown." He leaned forward. "People are like a flock of pigeons that have lost their lead bird. They don't need a savior high above. They need a leader who tells them how to save themselves." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Sullivan's proposal was a radical shift in path and belief. Benjamin stood motionless, the veins on his hands prominent as he weighed the risk. Then a voice broke the tension. It was Chesvia. She leaned against the wall, her eyes unusually clear. "I support Sullivan's idea," she said softly. "Extreme change is better than sitting in a pool of water, waiting to rot and sink." Evelyn watched Chesvia with growing surprise. The woman who usually sat in silence, offering only technical data, had suddenly transformed. She was no longer a mere observer. She was sharp, aggressive, and direct. Chesvia noticed the stare and didn't blink. "Is there anything strange about that?" she asked, her voice rising with a new, piercing intensity. "We have been attacked right on our doorstep. Those monsters from the capital broke through the sky and hurled the flames of war into our backyard." She held up 2 fingers, her tone dripping with impatience. "Stop going in circles. I will give you 2 directions. First," she straightened one finger, "take down the capital. The number of the unborn is not infinite. Their defenses are empty while they are out on the hunt. This is our only window of opportunity." She raised a second finger. "Second, We must take over the other 8 resurrection facilities before the enemy does. The forbidden knowledge and instruments inside those walls are the only weapons that can save us. They will bring about earth-shattering changes if we have the courage to seize them." Benjamin looked at her, a complex expression crossing his face. He saw a flicker of frenzy in her eyes, a raw ambition for power at any cost. He didn't recoil. Instead, he laughed. It was a sharp, sudden laugh of enlightenment. "I understand," Benjamin said slowly. "I truly do." Chesvia smiled back, her agitation cooling into a cold resolve. She brushed aside concerns about food shortages, suggesting they use experimental chemicals from Facility 7 to force crop growth. When Walter whispered a warning about side effects, Chesvia cut him off. "What are uncertain side effects compared to starving to death? Survival is the only priority." Benjamin nodded, his gaze sweeping across the room. "In the past, I walked on thin ice," he declared, his voice steady and iron-willed. "But the situation no longer allows me to play it safe. Even if this leads to a grave mistake, I will not hesitate." He turned to his commanders, his voice booming with authority. "Frosttown enters a state of total war, effective immediately. Expand the army. Accept anyone willing to fight. We will walk the path that must be walked." The air in the room grew heavy with the weight of his decision until a cautious knocking broke the silence. A servant hurried in, his voice a mere whisper. "My lord, the Lady of Ironforge has just arrived. She is waiting outside." Ella Pascal harbored a singular wish, to give Benjamin a surprise so profound it could only be described as frightening. She craved to be seen as a towering, reliable force in his eyes. To achieve this, she executed 2 monumental tasks with ruthless efficiency. First, Ella reclaimed her family's legacy. Without warning, she led elite guards into the Pascal family's central council chamber, bypassing all aristocratic etiquette. As her mother, Countess Daphne, listened to tax reports, Ella's rapier, forged of solidified ice, touched the noblewoman's neck. A deathly silence gripped the room. Clement, the family butler, stood at the door, his presence an invisible weight that stifled any resistance. Ella offered a chilling ultimatum: relinquish military power and family prestige, or she would seize it by force. Seeing the guards' silent submission and Clement's clear betrayal, Daphne yielded. Ella had become the master of the Pascal territory, promising her mother a peaceful retirement in exchange for absolute control. If the first task was about power, the second was born of inspiration. After seeing Benjamin's human-powered railcar, Ella envisioned something greater, a steam-powered engine on tracks. She summoned the iron-casting guild, demanding they mount a steam engine onto a carriage. The initial results were disappointing, a cumbersome, stationary iron box, but Ella was undeterred. She poured unlimited resources into the project, even using her own psychic blade abilities to forge precision parts during sleepless nights. The result was a colossal steel fortress on wheels. This monster, the length of 4 railcars, was a rugged behemoth of thick steel plates complete with a ram-like horn and firing ports. It was less a vehicle and more a mobile mountain of smoke and iron. Ella intended to perfect it further, but when she saw undead shadows over Ironforge and heard of the attack on Frost Town, she knew the time for waiting had ended. As the survivors in Frost Town rested from battle, a deafening roar tore through the air. On the thin tracks of the Silver Creek line, a steel giant appeared, spewing thick pillars of black smoke and shaking the very earth. Standing tall beside the driver's seat, her hair whipping in the wind, Ella looked toward the horizon with a fierce pride. "A surprise is coming, Benjamin," she whispered, as the iron beast thundered toward its destination. Benjamin stood frozen as a steel behemoth screeched to a halt along the tracks, panting like a living creature. A steam train, even with his knowledge as a transmigrator, seeing this primitive, smoke-billowing monster in the flesh made his head spin. "What, is it already over?" Ella leaped from the platform of her mobile fortress, her face a mask of hurried resentment. She had rushed to the front lines to join the battle, only to find the fighting had already ceased. But as she caught the look of pure awe in Benjamin's eyes, her frustration vanished, replaced by a familiar, radiant smugness. She planted her hands on her hips and tilted her chin up. "Well, handyman, are you shocked by Lady Ella's secret weapon?" "Indeed," Benjamin nodded, his voice thick with genuine sincerity. "Very impressive." He wasn't just being polite. He was stunned that Ella had transformed a complex concept into a breathing reality so quickly. He studied the heavy riveted plates and the maze of exposed pipes. It was a masterpiece of rugged, primitive industry. As Ella boasted about taming stubborn craftsmen and pulling all-nighters to forge key parts, Benjamin realized something he had never considered before. Ella might actually be a genius. Ella, he interrupted softly, his gaze steady. I am truly grateful for your support and for this amazing work, thank you. The sudden, heartfelt gratitude caught her off guard. Her ears turned a faint shade of pink and she waved a hand awkwardly, looking away. There's no need for that, isn't this what allies do? But Benjamin's warmth was a shield against the dark news weighing on his heart. He looked at her, his expression suddenly darkening. Ella, do you know about Calvin? Ella's playfulness vanished. She nodded solemnly. News travels fast between our territories. When I heard he was missing and the defense line was failing, I dispatched guards immediately. We have to stabilize the line. Seeing the pain in his eyes, she patted her chest firmly. Don't worry, being missing is good news. It means there's no body. Calvin is tough as nails. He's probably just hiding out, recovering. Benjamin managed a small, grateful smile, but he had more grim news to share. He quickly recounted the intelligence regarding the civil war in the south and the bitter conflict between their old friends, Celia and Finn. What are those two doing? Ella exploded, her hand gripping the hilt of her rapier until it creaked. The kingdom is full of monsters and they're fighting each other. Have they lost their minds? It's like handing a knife to the enemy, Benjamin agreed grimly. We have to stop them, Ella cried. Benjamin gave a help. Less smile, Ella, this isn't a team argument we can mediate with a quick chat. Finn wouldn't raise an army without a reason. He's weighed the consequences and decided this path is worth the cost. So you think Celia is in the wrong? I didn't say that, Benjamin countered. They both have their pressures and beliefs. Right or wrong doesn't matter anymore. The rift is already there. We can't go back in time. We can only contain the damage. Ella blinked, leaning in. So, what do we do? First, Benjamin said, his voice dropping an octave, we try to persuade them to prioritize the greater good, though the hope is slim. Second, we ensure the chaos in the south does not bleed into the royal territory. We are already standing on the edge of a cliff. We cannot afford another internal upheaval. We are a community. This short, powerful declaration spread like wildfire across the ravaged kingdom. It was no empty slogan. As the shadow of the dead loomed and blizzards devoured all hope, aid from neighbors crossed the walls of noble lands for the first time in history. A brightly colored army bearing the insignias of Frosthold, Ironhold, and Blackrockhold marched under a single coat of arms, the United Commune. They did not come to conquer. They came to exterminate the deadborn. Behind them trailed massive convoys loaded with cold-resistant seeds, honeycomb briquettes for fuel, and warm blankets. Commoners and minor nobles alike watched in stunned confusion. What did Benjamin Blackwood want in exchange for such wealth? Land? Loyalty? The answer arrived in leaflets carried by traveling troubadours. The old order has collapsed. Only we can save ourselves. The fire of the United Commune burns for all survivors. For those watching their families freeze, this was a lifeline from mortals, after the gods had gone silent. Minor lords, marginalized by the old aristocracy, saw the shifting tides. They began sending letters to Frosttown, not yet swearing fealty, but promising to stand with Benjamin against the coming storm. Unprecedented changes took place. Doors between territories swung open. Refugees flowed towards Silverbrook and Frosthold, where a man named Irwin coordinated food and shelter. Meanwhile, the joint forces of Frosttown and Blackrock pushed back the monsters, shifting the momentum of the war. But the true test lay in the east, in Liuhui territory. This was Benjamin's birthplace, the land where his parents once toiled as serfs. It was also the suspected site of a hidden resurrection facility used by the Witch Empire. Leading the relief force was Diona. He arrived with over 1,000 elite warriors to find Lord Kinnard, a pale, broken young man waiting in a ruined castle. Kinnard offered no resistance, only a sigh of liberation. He begged Diona to take his people to safety. Diona looked at the young lord and spoke firmly. Lord Kinnard, the Baron of Frosttown, will never abandon anyone in community. It is his order. Kinnard did not yet understand the weight of those words, but as the checkpoints opened and supplies flowed, he realized the world had changed. Diona turned toward the castle window, the weight of his secret mission pressing down. He had to find the facility. He had to win. He looked to his knights and commanded, "Ready to depart, we head to the battlefield." The battle at Stone Cliff territory has descended into a bloody quagmire and is on the verge of complete collapse. The onslaught of the dead is like an endless black tide, one wave rising after another, trampling over the remains of their own comrades. Even the griffin riders fall from the sky, their blood staining the rocky cliffs as flying monsters blot out the sun. The gap in numbers forms a despairing barrier. It is only when the Holy War Army takes over for the wounded regulars that the front line barely stabilizes. Jeffrey, a simple supply leader, huddles behind a makeshift shelter, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. Before him, the Deadborn advance, distorted forms with empty eye sockets radiating madness. But the Holy War Army is equally terrifying. They are a mix of civilians and soldiers, their eyes burning with a fanatical flame. They roar prayers as they fight to the death, refusing to retreat even a single step. Suddenly, Jeffrey feels himself being assimilated. When a soldier shields him from a fatal blow, Jeffrey roars, piercing a deathborn hound with his spear. He is no longer just a witness, he is a brick in this wall of flesh and blood. Jeffrey, his friend Pietro shouts, pulling him back to reality. "Your spear is broken, get a new one." Pietro leans in, whispering with suppressed excitement. "News from Frosttown, a secret order from the Baron himself." They rush to a makeshift tent to meet Gallon, the blue-haired commander. Inside, the air is heavy. Jeffrey opens the letter and reads aloud to the gathered leaders. The message is clear. The Alliance, Frosttown, Ironforge, Silverstream, and Blackrock has reached a consensus. They will no longer passively defend Stone Cliff. Instead, they will implement a flexible defense, trading space for time and drawing the enemy into a trap. Gallon nods slowly. "This idea is very good." From the shadows, a cloaked figure adds that the Northern Army is merely watching from the border, waiting for both sides to bleed out. Gallon's voice turns cold. "We must let the flames of war spread appropriately. Those who watch the fire from the sidelines will eventually get burned themselves." Soon the tide turns. The resistance forces retreat in an organized manner, luring the dead into gaps where their formations thin out. Small elite units begin flanking raids, tearing into the black tide. For the first time, the humans are pushing back. Meanwhile, far to the south in Golden Valley, the merchant Laurent hands a glass of wine to a travel-worn guest, Benjamin Blackwood. "The sea. Ven nights are a thing of the past," Laurent sighs, looking out over his prosperous manor. "Now the folk songs only sing of the Baron of Frosttown, the one ordained by heaven." Benjamin sips the wine and smiles enigmatically. "It seems the propaganda is working even better than I expected. Though," he adds with a hint of sarcasm, "that Mandate of Heaven title, it's a bit heavy. Next time, discuss the wording with me first." Lauren stood by the window, his voice heavy with the weight of a crumbling world. "Everything has changed too quickly," he murmured. "The kingdom and us." He turned to Benjamin, his eyes searching the face of his former companion. Once Benjamin was merely a quick-witted handyman. Now he was the Baron of Frosttown, a man wielding power that far surpassed Lauren's own commercial empire. A bitter spark of jealousy flickered in Lauren's heart. He downed his drink in one gulp, the glass meeting the table with a sharp, rhythmic clink asterisk. "Let's talk this out, Benjamin," Lauren said, his tone turning sharp. "The aid the communes, what is your ultimate goal?" Benjamin offered that same innocent smile Lauren remembered so well. "To help our neighbors, of course, to restore order." Lauren leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low growl. "There are no bards here, Benjamin, no crowds to appease. Tell me the truth. That will determine if I enter this game, and how." To Lauren's shock, Benjamin didn't evade. He laughed, a sound of genuine pleasure. "Lauren, your mistake is treating politics like a business deal where you can choose to invest or walk away. But look around you. My troops are in your markets. My ideas are in your villages. From the moment I sat down to drink with you, the world decided you were on my side." Benjamin leaned in, his gaze piercing. "You are already in the game, Lauren. The only question is whether you are an ally or an obstacle." The silence stretched between them. Lauren realized the terrifying truth. In a world without order, his vast wealth was nothing more than a target without Benjamin's protection. He sighed, his posture slumping. "Sullivan," Lauren asked quietly, "what is he to you now?" "Minister of Finance," Benjamin replied casually. "Chief Administrator, a rare talent." Lauren let out a long, defeated breath. For the sake of our past, be a little kinder to me, Benjamin. Benjamin's friendly smile returned like a mask. Of course, we are old friends after all. Later, outside the building, Benjamin met Aphrodite in the shadows. Is it resolved? He whispered. Golden Valley is ours, Benjamin confirmed. He looked toward the horizon, his mind already moving to the next piece on the board. The small territories have joined us, but the ancient families still wait. We won't chase them. Instead, we go to the Holy Spring territory. His expression darkened. The pale church had remained silent while the kingdom burned, their doors locked against the living and the dead alike. We need to know what they are hiding, Benjamin said, a cold edge to his voice. And luckily, we have an old friend there to help us find out. Benjamin and Aphrodite's journey to the Holy Spring territory was neither ostentatious nor disguised. They traveled south in a light carriage befitting their status, accompanied by a small number of elite guards. Currently, this territory is closed to the outside world, barred to all merchants and travelers. Benjamin only gained entry by claiming his title as the Lord of Frosttown, arriving for a formal visit. The atmosphere changes the moment one crosses the boundary. I must say, Benjamin commented, looking through the carriage window, this place is quite a nice environment to spend one's retirement in. Compared to the war-torn chaos outside, Holy Spring territory was a sanctuary of tranquility. Fields were meticulously tended, smoke curled from village chimneys, and pedestrians moved with an indifferent sense of order. There were no refugees and no pervasive anxiety. This excessive normality, in the face of a kingdom succumbing to madness, was the greatest anomaly of all. Aphrodite, however, had no fondness for this land. After we reach the main town, he told Benjamin, I will go to the chapel of the Spirit Garden Church to see Yolia. He must be under a lot of pressure, holding out in a place so firmly controlled by the Pale Church. The carriage finally stopped in Holy Spring City. Its prosperity was startling, wide, clean streets and buildings of light-colored stone. After a brief farewell, Aphrodite disappeared like a shadow into the crowd. Benjamin, meanwhile, was led by a monk toward the towering Pale Cathedral. The guide was a devout man who tirelessly preached the doctrines of the Pale Goddess. Benjamin listened with a gentle expression, but he frequently interrupted with sharp, logical questions that pointed out historical contradictions. Soon, the monk began to sweat, his explanations faltering under Benjamin's scrutiny. Inside the cathedral, the grandeur was overwhelming. Massive, simple lines created a sense of holiness that surpassed any aristocratic castle. The hall was packed with worshippers, men, women, and even unusually silent children, all immersed in a deep, continuous hum of prayer. Benjamin was led past the queues to a secluded room in the back. There, he met Livia. Years had left no trace on her. She wore plain white robes, her long white hair neatly tied back, surrounded by an aura so sacred it felt untouchable. She rose gracefully, pouring a cup of tea. It has been a long time, Benjamin, she said, her voice calm and pleasant. They exchanged pleasantries, discussing Benjamin's brother, Percival, who now served as Livia's guard captain. They reminisced about their old days in the hero's squad, letting the surface tension melt away. But finally, Benjamin put down his teacup. He raised his eyes, his gaze turning serious. Livia, he asked, his voice carrying an unavoidable weight. I want to know the Pale Church's attitude. Livia remained almost indifferent to Benjamin's questioning. She gracefully tucked a stray strand of silver hair behind her ear, her clear eyes reflecting a calculated doubt. Attitude, she repeated softly. Why do you ask that? Benjamin was prepared for her evasion. He spoke with earnest sincerity, reminding her of his deep respect for the Pale Goddess and his gratitude toward Princess Celia. He argued that the Pale Church, as a vital pillar of faith, must take a stand while the kingdom faces disintegration. Livia listened with a slight, knowing smile. You are as eloquent as ever, Benjamin, she remarked, before subtly shifting the subject. She suggested that instead of investigating the church, Benjamin should visit the southern territory to reconcile the princess and Finn. But Benjamin would not be swayed. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a tone of urgent gravity. He pleaded for the church to set aside prejudice and act as a beacon of light in the darkness. The air in the room seemed to freeze. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint, rhythmic chanting of prayers filtering through the stone walls. Finally, Livia broke the silence. Her voice was cold and firm. The Pale Church will not send troops to the capital, nor will it participate in your military operation against the Deadborn. Benjamin's gentle expression vanished, replaced by a sharp, scrutinizing gaze. He demanded to know why the church would turn a blind eye to the slaughter of the innocent. "What are you plotting?" he pressed. "This does not fit the Livia I remember, the one who prayed through the night for a plague-stricken village." Livia's eyelashes trembled. After another long pause, she confessed a hidden truth. The church was divided. She belonged to the conservative faction currently in power, which had received a direct order: Holy Spring territory must remain an isolated sanctuary. No matter if the kingdom falls, their only duty is to maintain their own purity. "Sometimes," Livia whispered, her fingers brushing the rim of her teacup, "people must choose a path they do not want, for a will that is harder to defy." Benjamin realized no consensus would be reached. He stood, straightened his robes, and prepared to leave. But as he pushed open the door, a tall, silent figure stood waiting in the shadows of the corridor. It was his brother Percival, a knight of the church. Percival's eyes were cold, his voice heavy with accusation. "I overheard your conversation," the knight growled, stepping forward with an intimidating pressure. "The way you spoke to the nun was extremely disrespectful." Benjamin did not flinch. He met his brother's gaze with flat, icy defiance. "Eavesdropping on a private conversation," Benjamin countered. "Now asterisk, that is real rudeness." "Forget it," Benjamin spoke first, raising a hand as if to extinguish the invisi. Blee tension thick in the air. He pleaded for a change of subject, anything to stop the atmosphere from turning so bitter. Percival watched him in silence, then gave a slight, cold nod, but the aloof aura surrounding him did not fade. Benjamin tried a safer path, mentioning how their parents were worried after months of silence. "I am now a devout believer and apologist under the Pale Goddess," Percival replied. His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reciting dogma. "Mortal blood ties should not affect my dedication to the faith." Benjamin's brow furrowed. "What are you saying? I don't like this, Percival." "More than a son or your brother," Percival continued, his gaze sweeping over Benjamin as if he were a lost soul. "I have only one identity, a follower of the goddess. Everything else is secondary." "If Mom and Dad heard you," Benjamin's voice turned somber, "it would break their hearts. Do you even care if they are well, or do you hold some grievance against the family that raised you?" Percival fell silent again, not because he was thinking, but with a condescending indifference. The composure Benjamin had maintained since arriving in Holy Spring territory finally cracked. "You're something else," Benjamin spat, his brother's name dripping with coldness. "They risked everything to send you to the church, and now that you have status, you think your family is a burden, a worldly entanglement to be severed." "Benjamin, what are you saying?" Percival's voice carried a hint of offended ice. "I'm curious how someone becomes like this." Benjamin stepped forward, meeting that frozen gaze. "If your goddess had any sense of humanity, would she be proud of a follower who treats his family like this?" Suddenly, bang! Benjamin was slammed against the stone wall. Percival's arm pressed hard against his neck, forcing him to gasp for breath. "Go on," Percival hissed through clenched teeth. Benjamin didn't resist. He simply turned his head and spoke with a broken yet clear tone. "What? Are you trying to create a diplomatic incident, an enemy for your beloved church?" The words hit like daggers. Monks and knights rushed over, pulling Percival away. An elder monk bowed deeply, sweating, offering frantic apologies for Percival's uncontrolled emotions. Benjamin straightened his collar, coughing lightly. He forced an impeccable, aloof smile back onto his face. "It's nothing, just a misunderstanding." But the moment he stepped out of the cathedral, the mask shattered. His face turned incredibly gloomy, darker than the winter clouds. He felt a disgust worse than swallowing a fly. At the street corner, Aphrodite was waiting in the shadows. His face was just as ugly, a volcano of suppressed rage. Benjamin broke the silence first. "I'm feeling very bad right now." Aphrodite stepped forward, his voice a low, raging fire. "What a coincidence, me too." The surrounding environment was a small, aging orphanage. The facilities were weathered, and only a few simple wooden toys sat scattered across the small yard. Inside, the furniture was sparse, yet kept exceptionally clean. Aphrodite carried a wobbly wooden chair out of the empty inner room, placing it before Benjamin. "This is the only church of the Spirit Garden in Holy Spring territory," he said. "It is mainly used as an orphanage." Benjamin did not sit, his gaze swept over the deserted courtyard. "It looks like everyone is gone." "This is how it was when I arrived," Aphrodite replied, his voice trembling with suppressed anger. "Yolia is nowhere to be found. I have been searching the area, but no one can tell me where he went or what happened." Benjamin frowned. "Where are the children? Where did they go?" "They were taken away by the Pale Church," Aphrodite said, his tone turning icy. "Just a few days ago. They claimed it was for unified protection to prevent them from being affected by the turmoil outside, but now no outsiders are allowed to visit them, not even the neighbors who knew them well." Benjamin stated the obvious. "You believe something happened to Yolia and that the Pale Church is responsible." "It is a certainty," he insisted. "The people nearby are terrified. They have been given a strict gag order. In this territory, only the Pale Church can command such silence." Benjamin paused for several seconds, processing the information. "I understand. Yolia was a chosen one, was he not?" Aphrodite nodded. "Very well, let me look for him. As long as he is still in this city, I will find him." Benjamin closed his eyes. He unleashed his mental blade and his aura stilled. An invisible ripple spread rapidly in all directions like a pebble thrown into calm water. A moment later, his eyes snapped open. "There are 22 divinely favored beings in this city. That is quite a number." He focused deeper. 10 chosen ones are concentrated inside the Pale Cathedral. That is normal for their core, but... He stopped, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" Aphrodite pressed. "There is something at the cathedral," Benjamin whispered. "A field is interfering with my senses. It is blocking me. This is the first time I have ever been shielded like this." Aphrodite's eyes sharpened. "Then let us try connecting with others outside the church first." "It is already being done," Benjamin replied. His consciousness swept through the city like invisible tentacles. He filtered through the patrolling guards and the preachers until he caught a different spot of light. It was elusive, hidden deep in the back alley of an inconspicuous tavern. "Interesting," Benjamin smiled. "A wild chosen one from the hidden church. He is well concealed, but he cannot escape a targeted scan." He turned to Aphrodite. "Yolia is not among those outside. However, I have found a stronghold of the hidden church. They will have the intelligence we need." Benjamin analyzed their options. "We could formally wreck. Used a visit to the orphans as the Baron of Frosttown, but that would alert the Pale Church immediately. Or, we visit the hidden church stronghold directly. They know the secrets behind the Pale Church's recent actions." Aphrodite agreed with a sarcastic edge. "The Pale Church persecutes all faiths equally. We need not worry about being betrayed by the hidden ones." "Before we set off," Benjamin's voice turned cold as he glanced toward a corner outside the orphanage. "Let us deal with those 2 peeping rats first." At his command, his guards darted out like cheetahs. Moments later, 2 men in civilian clothes were thrown onto the ground, their hands tied. "What are you doing sneaking around me?" Benjamin asked. One man forced a nervous smile. "Baron, you misunderstand. We are parish supervisors. We were worried about your safety." "You should be worried," Benjamin nodded, his face expressionless. "This place is indeed not very safe." He turned to his guards. "Treat these gentlemen well, do not let them leave, and do not let them make any unnecessary noise." Benjamin straightened his sleeves and gestured to Aphrodite. "Let's go. Let's see what surprises our friends from the hidden church have in store for us." The Absinthe Tavern stands as a defiant anomaly within the Holy Spring territory, the only sanctuary not governed by the rigid Pale Church. Inside, the air is a thick, suffocating soup of sweat and cheap alcohol. Benjamin and Aphrodite push through the heavy wooden doors, their refined presence instantly drawing wary glares from the rowdy crowd. Benjamin leans toward his companion, whispering with a dry smirk, "Maybe I should have changed into something less conspicuous." They approach the bar where Benjamin flicks a gleaming gold shield onto the counter. It spins with a sharp, metallic ring. "The strongest drink you have," he commands. The sharp-eyed receptionist pours 2 glasses of a potent northern liquor. Benjamin takes a fiery sip, then leans in, his voice dropping to a calm, dangerous low. "We want to see the leader of the hidden church." The woman freezes. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammers, but the lie is thin. Aphrodite interjects, his voice cold. I am of the Linguan Church. I can recite your secret doctrines here and now, if you prefer. Benjamin gestures toward the kitchen. We know about the trapdoor behind the storage shelf. We know about the basement chapel. He glances at the woman's twitching fingers. And I saw your hand signals. Are your people closing the doors now, drawing the blackout curtains? As if on cue, thud, the heavy linen curtains are yanked shut, plunging the room into a tense, oil-lit gloom. Your tone is too aggressive, Aphrodite murmurs, sensing the shift. I just hate wasting time, Benjamin shrugs. By the way, 5 armed men are closing in behind us. Suddenly the air shatters. Aphrodite moves like a blur of lethal precision. No mag. Ike just raw explosive force. Elbows, knees, and fists find their marks with sickening thuds. Within heartbeats, 5 attackers are crumpled on the floor. Other thugs draw daggers, but the blades suddenly wrench free from their hands, hovering in midair, reversed, and pressed firmly against their own throats by Benjamin's invisible will. Benjamin sets down his empty glass and looks at the pale, trembling receptionist. Now, he says, his voice carrying a heavy weight of authority, can we have a proper talk, or do we go directly to your manager? The patrons gathered in the tavern were no ordinary thugs. They moved with a chilling, practiced precision. Even after witnessing their companion's sudden defeat, they did not panic. Instead, they shifted silently, forming a lethal circle that blocked every exit. Benjamin remained calm, turning his gaze to the receptionist behind the bar. We are only here to visit, he said, his voice steady. If this escalates and draws the Pale Church's patrols, it would be a shame to lose this stronghold you've worked so hard to build. The receptionist gritted her teeth, glancing at her groaning allies before finally signaling her men to stand down. Follow me, she muttered. She led them through a greasy kitchen to a hidden door concealed behind a shelf of wine barrels. As they descended rough stone steps, she whispered in confusion, How did you find us? Even the church's inquisitors cannot sniff this place out. Benjamin offered only a dismissive reply, an accidental discovery. At the bottom, they entered a cramped underground sanctuary. A man in a dark gray cloak knelt before a fading statue of a goddess. Aphrodite placed a hand on Benjamin's arm, whispering a warning. The man was in deep meditation. They waited in the heavy silence until the figure finally rose. This was Brother Sassoon, a high-ranking monk of the hidden church. He recognized his visitors immediately, the bishop Aphrodite and the man known as Baron Blackwood. After dismissing the receptionist, Sassoon spoke with blunt honesty. Bishop Yolia was arrested by the Pale Church for inciting the Holy Army, Sassoon revealed. He escaped the dungeon 3 days later and stormed the Pale Cathedral to demand answers. Since then, he has vanished. I suspect he is being held in the cathedral's deepest sanctum, the only place my eyes cannot reach. Sassoon's expression darkened as he moved to a more unsettling topic. He explained that the miracle protecting this territory from the undead was no divine blessing. The deadborn do not avoid this land by choice, Sassoon insisted. They are stopped by an invisible physical barrier encircling the entire core territory. Aphrodite gasped, a barrier of that scale, it is unheard of. Benjamin's brow furrowed as a memory flickered. An invisible, transparent wall, he mused. It sounds exactly like Livia's psychic blade. He shook his head immediately, dismissing the thought, the Livia he knew was powerful, but no mortal could possess the strength to shield an entire province. Sassoon looked sharply from beneath his hood, his voice a low rasp. So Baron Blackwood, now that you know the truth, what do you plan to do? Will you pretend nothing happened? Or do you plan to rescue Yolia from the Pale Church? Aphrodite watched Benjamin silently, waiting. Benjamin clasped his hands, pondering the weight of the choice. Finally, he looked up. I want to thwart the church's self-serving agenda and get Yolia out. Whether this angers them, well, that is not important. Their attitude is hardly friendly. He turned to Aphrodite, his voice firm. Remember, whatever we do next has nothing to do with Frosttown or the United Commune. This is my personal action, out of concern for a comrade, understand? Aphrodite nodded, expressionless. Sassoon, Benjamin continued, does your hidden church have eyes inside the cathedral, maintenance workers, low-level clerics? Sassoon paused, weighing the risk. Yes, we have reliable individuals in inconspicuous positions. It is one of our most vital assets. Very good, Benjamin leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They will help Bishop Aphrodite enter the cathedral in disguise, and I will formally meet with Sister Livia under the guise of visiting an old friend. If I am lucky, I can find Yolia through personal connections. If not, he glanced at Aphrodite. The implication was clear: they would use force. The next day, beneath the massive arches of the pale cathedral, Aphrodite moved stiffly. He wore oversized, pale robes, his hood pulled low to hide his face. Every inch of the fabric felt like a sting against his skin. He felt defiled. Through their mental link, Benjamin's teasing voice echoed, "Take it easy, Your Excellency. You are a devout believer now. Don't walk like you're stepping on nails." Meanwhile, in the reception hall, Benjamin sat across from Livia. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting dappled colors across the room. "I thought you would have left yesterday," Livia said softly. Benjamin smiled, his posture relaxed. "I couldn't leave without saying a few words to an old friend." Livia sighed, her gaze lingering on him. "I know you are dissatisfied with our actions, but please believe me, this strategy is a necessity to protect the safety of the believers." "Strategy?" Benjamin repeated, a cold edge creeping into his voice. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Livia, do you even believe what you're saying? Are believers divided into classes? Are only those within these walls worthy of protection, while those outside are left to be devoured by the dead? Tell me, who deserves to be abandoned?" Faced with Benjamin's sharp questioning, Livia remains calm, her voice adopting a didactic, almost lecturing tone. She explains that choices must be made, that the goddess's radiance shines only Yupo. And the most devout and courageous. Benjamin's response is cold, devoid of emotion, yet more grating than any direct sarcasm. He asks who exactly sets the standards for such piety. Livia's brows furrow. She insists this was a reluctant decision made after careful consideration, but Benjamin simply shakes his head, a slight, haunting smile appearing on his face. He tells her he has no complaints, because without expectations there can be no disappointment. He draws a sharp line between them, stating that what belongs to the church stays with the church, and what belongs to the people stays with the people. Livia looks at him, sensing the growing distance. Benjamin interrupts, his tone softening into a feigned sincerity. He claims he is merely expressing grievances as a friend. He pauses, letting Livia almost step into that role, before adding with chilling clarity, "Of course, I am not referring to you." In that instant, the light in Livia's eyes dims. Her fingers curl against her knees before forcing themselves to relax. Benjamin presses on. He speaks of Yolia, the bishop of the Church of the Spirit Garden, his friend who is now missing. He notes that all signs point to the Pale Church. Livia counters that Yolia was detained for his impulsive, violent actions against the sanctuary. Benjamin nods slowly. He describes Yolia as a man who believed in the pure justice of the 7 Knights of Light, a man who simply could not accept the path his former heroes had chosen. His words act like fine needles, piercing the softest corners of Livia's heart. Benjamin offers to pay for all damages, invoking his rights as a nobleman to bail out his friend. He looks at her quietly, his gaze filled with an undeniable curiosity. He knows Yolia would never kill. He watches as Livia's lips move, but no words come out. Then, for the first time, a flash of unmistakable panic crosses her eyes. Benjamin leans forward, his voice deepening with an ominous urgency. "Take me to him, Livia, now, immediately." Livia stiffens, her knuckles turning white. The atmosphere becomes suffocating. Finally, Benjamin stops beating around the bush. He looks directly into her evasive eyes and asks, word by word, "Livia, are you hiding something from me? Tell me, what exactly did you do to Yolia?" The tense atmosphere between Benjamin and Livia was shattered by Percival's sudden intrusion. The second brother stood like a cold, iron wall, his eyes sharp as knives, as he barked at Benjamin to shut up and know his place. Benjamin remained unnervingly calm. He turned his gaze to the man, noting the heavy guardian knight armor. "I am communicating with Miss Livia," Benjamin said, his voice steady, "in my capacity as the Baron of Frosttown, or perhaps as a former friend. Our status in this room is perfectly matched, completely equal, unlike you." Percival's fist clenched, but Livia raised a pale hand to stop him. She looked at Benjamin with a complicated, pained expression, yet she did not refute her brother's intervention. Instead, she allowed Percival to invite Benjamin out of the meditation room. Benjamin did not resist. He simply announced that he would admire the magnificent Pale Cathedral while he was there. Percival, wanting to avoid a scene, coldly assigned a low-level cultivator to watch him. As Benjamin strolled past the ancient icons and stained-glass windows, his mind was elsewhere. He was projecting an invisible blade of thought scanning the cathedral. The interference was thick, like looking through frosted glass, but Benjamin pushed back. He focused his mental energy into a precise probe, piercing through the mud of the church's magical shielding. Fine beads of sweat seeped from his forehead, then his eyes brightened. "Found it," he murmured. Through a telepathic link, he contacted Aphrodite, who was waiting on standby. "Turn left," Benjamin commanded, guiding the shadow-like figure through the church's inner corridors. "Avoid the 3 deacons, guards behind the pillar to your right, go around them." Aphrodite moved with silent grace, marveling at the convenience of Benjamin's mental radar, but Benjamin's voice grew serious. "Aphrodite, the area ahead has the strongest shielding. Our connection will likely be severed. Are you sure you want to take this risk?" "Of course," Aphrodite replied firmly. "The Church of the Spirit Garden will not abandon a comrade." Benjamin respected the decision but offered one final warning: "Safety first. I have countless ways to get Yolia out. Do not throw your life away." Aphrodite soon reached the heart of the interference. Hidden behind a remote confessional was a downward stone staircase, guarded by 2 elite knights in dark gray armor. They stood like lifeless steel statues, their overlapping lines of sight leaving no blind spots. Aphrodite's mind raced. A frontal assault would alert the entire cathedral. A diversion was impossible in this silence. As the mental link with Benjamin began to flicker and fade, Aphrodite realized he was out of options. He took a deep breath and sent a final, urgent signal through the static. "Barren, save me, give me an idea." Faced with an urgent plea for help, Benjamin's voice echoes through the telepathic link with a hint of mockery. "My lord," he teases, "couldn't you just use your legendary stealth skills to sneak in unnoticed?" Aphrodite nearly rolls his eyes in the shadows. "Stop joking. Stealth, I don't know how to do that. Come up with a working idea already." Benjamin sighs, his mental voice tinged with self-mockery. "As a baron, it feels like I have to do everything myself. It is easy to distract those 2 tin cans, but slipping through that heavy door unnoticed, that is the challenge." Guided by Aphrodite's eyes, Benjamin observes the scene. The area is dim, lit only by 4 copper oil lamps embedded in the stone walls. A risky plan forms, one relying on precise telekinesis and perfect timing. Benjamin conveys the details, warning of the risks. Aphrodite doesn't hesitate. "I have no objection. If we fail, I'll just fight my way out. I don't like those 2 blocking my way regardless." "You're tough," Benjamin chuckles. "Fine, get ready. I'll count to 3. 1. Aphrodite tenses his muscles, fixing his gaze on the stone gate and the 2 armored guards. 2. Benjamin's telekinesis extends like an invisible hand toward the nearest lamps. 3. Swish snap. The bases of 2 lamps are yanked violently. They hit the ground with a whoosh splashing burning oil across the floor. The guards, reacting like well-trained statues, spring into action. The guard on the left rushes to smother the flames with his heavy cloak. The guard on the right, fearing for the room beyond, heaves the heavy stone door open to check the interior. In that split second, as the door swings wide, Benjamin strikes again. A precise demonic wind sweeps across the remaining lamps. Flicker, snap. Total darkness. Aphrodite lunges. He charges toward the opening, his body brushing past the guard's armor like a formless shadow. He slips through the crack just as the door begins to groan shut. Inside, he crouches against the wall, heart pounding like a drum. Outside, he hears the clatter of armor as the confused guards relight the lamps, never suspecting a soul had passed them. "Phew," Benjamin's voice returns, crackling with interference. "You hit the jackpot. Those helmets seem to protect against intelligence as well as swords." Aphrodite grins in the dark. "Perhaps I'm a natural at stealth. I could start a new business." "Don't get cocky," Benjamin warns. "The interference is getting stronger. I can barely sense your surroundings now." "Perfectly fine," Aphrodite whispers, moving forward. "I've mastered this." But a second later, he rounds a corner and nearly slams into 2 pale-faced monks. He freezes, retreating into a wall recess with lightning speed. He holds his breath as they pass, their footsteps fading into the gloom. Look at you, Benjamin's voice rings out, sharp with a warning. The essence of stealth is assuming someone is always around the corner. Don't be overconfident. Aphrodite wipes cold sweat from his brow. I was distracted by your chatting. I'm getting serious now. When Aphrodite declared he was going to get serious, Benjamin expected a display of masterful stealth. The reality was somewhat different. Left, footsteps on the right, lie down, be quiet. Benjamin's mental rants punctuated Aphrodite's repeated, narrow escapes. The man's serious stealth relied less on technique and more on raw reaction speed, absolute trust in Benjamin's warnings, and perhaps a tiny bit of luck. Stop, Benjamin's thoughts echoed. Aphrodite pressed himself against the cold stone wall. What's wrong? Is someone there? Nose, look at the wall. In dim light, a vibrant yet archaic mural depicted a female figure with a halo, spreading her arms to cover a grotesque black hole in the sky with a fabric of soft light. Below, tiny figures knelt in ecstasy. The pale goddess patches up the sky, Aphrodite read aloud, his voice dripping with contempt. Completely fabricated history. Why don't they just say she created the sun? At least the paints look expensive, Benjamin remarked. Walk a little further, there's another, the goddesses bowing to the pale goddess. See if you can spot your goddess of the spirit garden in that crowd. Aphrodite felt a wave of unease, as if his faith were being defiled by the mere sight of the lesser deities bowing to the radiant figure. Let's go. These propaganda posters are only good for fooling the ignorant. As they moved deeper underground, the rough stone gave way to polished walls with metal trim. Benjamin pondered. How did the Pale Church build this without the royal families noticing? Unless they didn't build it at all, they found it. Voices drifted from ahead, deep and multiple. Aphrodite went on high alert, moving with genuine caution now. The passage opened into a bright, arched stone chamber filled with the scent of chemicals and the sight of unsettling instruments, metal forceps, glass pumps, and crystal bottles. In the center, 4 monks in pale robes surrounded a stone bed. A person was strapped to it, groaning in muffled agony. One monk held a long, bronze syringe, carefully inserting a hollow needle into the victim's arm. Preparing to infuse the holy blood, the monk whispered, may this vessel last longer. As the dark red liquid entered the vein, the person on the bed stiffened. A blood-curdling, inhuman scream shattered the silence. Dark blue veins bulged beneath the skin like wriggling worms. Aphrodite, Benjamin's mind sharpened. Take them down now. Aphrodite moved like lightning. He darted into the room, a hand chopped to the first neck, an elbow to the second temple, a low sweep and a punch to the third. He lunged for the monk with the needle, but the man didn't go down instantly. He opened his mouth to shriek, but his voice was drowned out by another heart-wrenching howl from the victim on the table. Aphrodite lunged, covering the monk's mouth. Wait, Benjamin interrupted. Don't knock him out yet, interrogate him. Aphrodite whispered harshly, answer me or you end up like him. The monk's eyes flared with fanatical resistance. Blasphemer, the goddess will punish you. See, Aphrodite sighed mentally, nothing but dogma in there. With a decisive blow, Aphrodite silenced the final monk. He turned his attention to the room. Tall cabinets were filled with jars and several other beds were covered with dirty white sheets. The person on the bed is a chosen one, Benjamin noted grimly. I can sense his essence. What is the church doing? Research, torture. Aphrodite picked up the fallen syringe. They inject at him with blood. He walked to the covered beds and pulled back the first sheet. Beneath lay a shriveled gray corpse, its skin clinging to the bone, covered in eerie, dark red spiderweb patterns. He checked the others. They were the same, gruesome, drained of life, some showing signs of failed, horrific mutations. These corpses, they've been emptied, Aphrodite whispered. A chilling realization took hold. The Pale Church was using the chosen ones for dangerous experiments, and Yolia, their friend, was likely in far more danger than they ever imagined. The sordid human experiments fit every dark stereotype Benjamin held about the church. Now he understood why Livia's eyes wavered when she spoke of Yolia. She knew, she was aware, and perhaps she was even involved. Aphrodite's face was ashen in the dim light. He stared at the syringe in his hand, filled with holy blood, then looked at the victim on the stone bed, still enduring inhuman torture. I'm worried about Yulia, Aphrodite whispered. If he falls into their hands, will he suffer the same fate? Benjamin remained calm, though his thoughts were grim. Everything deep underground was a secret the Pale Church dared not let its believers know. One of their core commandments was an ironclad law: never use humans for any form of experiment. To do so was blasphemy. So Aphrodite spat with contempt. These hypocrites trample on the very doctrines they claim to worship. I feel sorry for the goddess, having such self-righteous believers. His gaze swept the room, landing on a sealed crystal container. Inside sat half a jar of dark red holy blood. Take it, Benjamin instructed. We can't leave empty-handed. This might be worth showing to Chesvia, but be careful. I have a feeling it's very unstable. Aphrodite tucked the heavy jar into his robe and glanced one last time at the dying man on the bed. He couldn't linger. Speed up, Benjamin urged telepathically. Our men have horses and carriages waiting outside. Find Yulia and get out. Aphrodite abandoned perfect stealth for efficiency. If a monk blocked his path, he struck, swiftly closing in, stunning them, dragging them into the shadows. I've decided, Aphrodite muttered to Benjamin, that the essence of stealth isn't being unseen. It's ensuring whoever sees you can't report it. Benjamin's mental response was laced with mockery. Ah, right, the master of logic. Knock out all the witnesses and the world is peaceful. The levity vanished as they reached the underground prison. Aphrodite peered through an observation window into a large cell. Inside were 5 or 6 people, all radiating the power of Nen blades. They were the god-chosen, and there, in the corner, was a familiar figure. Yulia, Aphrodite called out. The man turned, his eyes wide with shock. Aphrodite, how did you get here? No time to explain, Aphrodite strode forward. I'm getting you out, all of you. But the instant he spoke, Benjamin's warning exploded in his mind. Watch out behind you. Aphrodite rolled instinctively. A steel crossbow bolt hissed through the air, thwack embedding itself into the stone wall. A figure stood at the door, clad in silver-white armor engraved with holy symbols. In his hand was a two-handed longsword, enveloped in eerily burning pale flames. Infiltrating the sanctuary, attempting to plunder criminals, the knight's voice echoed from behind his visor. Heretic, you have committed an unforgivable sin. Aphrodite assumed a fighting stance. Barren, he whispered to Benjamin, this is a paladin of the Pale Church, the goddess's blade. Open the cages, Benjamin commanded. Release the others. I can't, Aphrodite countered, his mind racing. The bars are enchanted. They block my blades. I can't break them. The path forward was blocked by a powerful elite, and the prisoners behind him were trapped. The situation had just become incredibly difficult. Inside the prison corridor, the air seemed to freeze. A longsword, burning with pale flames, stood in stark contrast to the silently spreading shadows of thorns. The imprisoned chosen ones held their breath, watching nervously as the conflict erupted outside their cages. What number? Benjamin's thoughts came succinctly, without a single wasted word. Aphrodite's gaze was fixed on the Templar knight, but his mental response carried the confidence of a bishop. What are the odds? If we play freely, victory is inevitable. Then go all out, Benjamin instructed. Eliminate the obstacles before their main force can encircle us. Aphrodite moved. Without warning, the stone bricks beneath the knight split open. Dozens of enormous, dark brown thorns, thick as a man's arm, surged forth like awakening snakes. They coiled around the knight's legs, waist, and arms. The Templar reacted instantly. With a low shout, he drew an arc with his flaming sword. Wherever the edge passed, the tough thorns turned to ash. Aphrodite frowned. These pale flames were the nemesis of Mind Blade creations, but he had more tricks in his arsenal. Drink. As the knight prepared to rush forward, the 4 stone walls erupted with a violent torrent of dark red thorns. These were denser, shimmering with a metallic sheen. They acted like countless javelins and iron whips, pressing toward the knight from every angle. The narrow passage became a shrinking cage of bloody thorns. The knight was slammed back. He struggled desperately, his armor creaking against the immense pressure. He was like an insect trapped in amber, tightly bound in midair. Not bad, Benjamin's thoughts carried a hint of admiration. This trick is effective for trapping people. But this one isn't strong enough, Aphrodite analyzed calmly. A true veteran could form flame armor to break free. I must move quickly. Aphrodite turned to the cages. Yolia and the other prisoners watched him anxiously. N'Jamin scanned the locks with his mind, but his brow furrowed. The material of these bars, I have never seen anything like it. My psychic power cannot penetrate it. The underground area filled with the sounds of hurried footsteps. The guards were coming. Aphrodite, you must unlock this before the main force arrives. Benjamin's voice carried a hint of urgency. I am thinking. Aphrodite stared at the complex padlock. His eyes narrowed. It seems we have no choice but to rely on brute force. Buy me some time. All right, Benjamin replied, his mental focus shifting. Livia is rushing toward the entrance. She looks terrible. I will try to stall her. Hurry. Benjamin's voice rang out through the hollow silence of the church. Livia. He strode toward the group gathered at the stone staircase leading to the underground vaults. Livia paused, her expression grave, though she tried to mask her stress. Benjamin, I have an urgent matter. Could we talk later? Wait. Benjamin stepped between her and the stairs, his face a mask of sincere remorse. Behind Livia, the knight Percival stood like a cold shadow, his gaze piercing, but Benjamin ignored him. It's about us, please, just a few minutes. Livia hesitated, glancing at the high-ranking monks and knights behind her before gesturing for them to wait. What is it? Please hurry. Benjamin took a deep breath. I was too harsh before, he said, his voice dropping to a soft, intimate register. I didn't consider your difficulties within the Pale Church. We've been through life and death together, Livia. I should have tried to understand you. A glimmer of emotion softened Livia's eyes. Really, Benjamin, I thought. A senior monk interrupted with a sharp, warning cough. The pressure of reality returned to Livia's face. Thank you, Benjamin, she whispered, but something has happened below. We must go. As she tried to sidestep him, Benjamin moved half a step to block her path and gently grasped her wrist. Percival's hand instantly flew to the hilt of his sword. Why wait? Benjamin asked, his voice filled with a feigned, puzzled warmth. Don't you trust me? Caught between the warmth of his grip and the glares of her superiors, Livia froze. The elder monk, losing patience, snapped, Sister Livia, stay and handle the barren. We will investigate the situation below without you. Benjamin's smile widened. No, you misunderstand. I want to invite you all as a gesture of friendship from the United Commune to a gathering. We can discuss how to weather these times over drinks rather than rushing off to deal with trivialities. The monks bristled. They knew the cathedral's basement was in chaos. Every second wasted was a disaster. Lord Blackwood, the elder monk growled, this cannot wait. As the group prepared to shove past him, Benjamin's eyes flashed. He played his final card, his voice dropping to a low, penetrating hum. Would you really like to reconcile? Or perhaps we could discuss the legacy of ancient empires, for example, the resurrection facilities. The air froze. The elder monk stopped dead, his anxiety replaced by sheer astonishment. Livia shuddered, her breath hitching. Benjamin had struck their most sensitive nerve. Meanwhile, deep beneath the cathedral, the atmosphere was far less tense and far more absurd. Keep going, Bishop, it's about to crack. Think of the beer, Aphrodite, think of the sunshine. 5 imprisoned God's favorites were crowded against their cell door, cheering like spectators at a sport. Outside the bars, Aphrodite, the usually elegant bishop of the sacred garden, was a mess of sweat and desperation. He was swinging a borrowed longsword against a massive, complex lock. Clang, clang. Sparks flew. Aphrodite panted, his mental energy nearly spent from maintaining a barrier of thorns to keep the guards back. I must learn lock-picking, he wheezed, swinging again. Click. The lock split. The prisoners erupted in cheers, rushing out into the hall. Aphrodite leaned on his sword, gasping, We're out, but the exit will be surrounded. Yolia, one of the freed warriors, flashed a ruthless smile. He cracked his knuckles, feeling his power returning. We've had nothing to do but plan for this day, he said, looking at the thick stone wall. The conclusion is simple. He lunged forward, his fist glowing with divine power. Boom! The wall spiderwebbed with cracks. If the door is guarded, Yolia roared, we forge our own path. The other prisoners joined in, unleashing a barrage of punches and mental blades against the masonry. They weren't escaping, they were demolishing. Aphrodite watched the human demolition hammers for a moment, then grinned. He pressed his hands to the stone, channeling his remaining power to rot the rock from within. Demolishing the pale church, count me in. Deep beneath the pale cathedral, the air hangs heavy with the scent of ancient secrets. Benjamin Blackwood, known to some as Aphrodite, stands within the crypt, his mind racing. He has just realized the truth. This place is a revival facility of the witch empire, hidden beneath layers of church renovation. The moment Benjamin speaks the words resurrection facility, the atmosphere shifts. Livia and the high-ranking monks behind her freeze. Their faces twist into a volatile cocktail of greed, shock, and a desperate need to protect a dark secret. An older monk rushes forward, his eyes burning with a frantic hunger, demanding to know where Benjamin learned such a name. Benjamin plays his part perfectly, acting the role of a confused explorer, mixing half-truths with vague fragments of information. He watches as their fervor dims into disappointment, yet he knows he has become a target they cannot let go. Livia steps forward, her hand tightening on his arm with a desperate, crushing grip. She begs him to stay, but Benjamin demurs, sit. In his duties as the Baron of Frosttown. Then a violent tremor shakes the cathedral. Boom, the sound of crashing stone and the ring of steel echo from the depths. The intruders have broken through. Benjamin offers a polite smile, attempting to leave, but Livia's voice turns sharp. You must stay now. Here, her nails dig into his skin. Percival Blackwood steps forward, his voice cold and flat as he accuses Benjamin of involvement in the chaos. Surrounded by knights and monks, Benjamin simply smiles, a relaxed, chillingly calm expression, and agrees to their invitation. Meanwhile, in a cramped safe house across the city, the chosen ones catch their breath after a narrow escape. Among them, Aphrodite stands apart, his back to the room, radiating a heavy, oppressive aura. Through a mental link, he screams at Benjamin's consciousness. What do you mean you were invited inside? Benjamin's voice returns, calm and steady. He explains that his capture is a calculated exchange, a way to buy the others time to flee, but Aphrodite's rage boils over. He knows the horrors the church inflicts on their prisoners. He slams his fist into the stone wall, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Benjamin Blackwood, listen to me, he growls in his mind, his forehead pressed against the cold stone. I don't care about your plans. My promise is to get you out of here unharmed, and that is exactly what I am going to do. Benjamin sensed the sharp sting of Aphrodite's remorse through their psychic link. He waited a beat, letting the silence hang, before speaking with cold, commanding clarity. Aphrodite, do not flatter yourself. I am staying by my own choice, not as a sacrifice. He explained the stakes with calculated precision. If they all fled, the Pale Church would have the perfect excuse to crush their emerging community. With the threat of the dead ones still looming, Benjamin refused to trigger a full-scale war. Listen to me, Benjamin ordered. Take Julia and the other chosen ones, return to Frosttown immediately. Tell Chesvia and Sullivan every single detail of what happened here. The faster you spread this intelligence, the safer I will be. The church will not dare act against me once the public is watching. Do you understand? Go, now. On the other end of the link, the sound of Aphrodite's ragged breathing eventually faded into the sharp crack of clenched fists. Understood, the reply came back, heavy with resolve. We leave now, take care. Moments later, inside the oppressive silence of the pale cathedral, Benjamin sat relaxed in a wooden chair. He was surrounded. 4 armed knights stood like statues against the walls, while across the table sat Livia and 2 stern, high-ranking monks. Behind Livia, Percival loomed like a loyal shadow. No tea, no fruit, Benjamin asked, his voice echoing in the hollow room. We have walked quite a long way. One monk snorted in disgust, but Livia leaned forward, her eyes hard. Benya. Men, the intrusion and the prisoner raid in the sanctuary, they are inextricably linked to you. Benjamin raised an eyebrow, his expression a mask of perfect innocence. Inextricably linked, I was simply visiting when Percival summoned me. Prisoners, sabotage, those are heavy charges, Livia. Stop playing dumb, she snapped. Your companion, the Bishop of the Spirit Garden, was among the heretics who escaped. What were you looking for? Benjamin spread his hands wide. I am baffled. Is this how the church treats visiting nobles? If word gets out, your reputation might suffer. Livia's composure began to crack. Benjamin, we have known each other for years. Do not treat me like this. The playfulness vanished from Benjamin's face. He leaned in, his gaze sharpening into a blade. On the contrary, Livia, I feel there are simply too many secrets you have kept. I would be happy to discuss everything I have guessed, but are your esteemed colleagues and my dutiful brother prepared to be so frank? The monks' faces turned ashen. Livia hesitated, then signaled to the guards. Everyone out, she commanded. Wait outside the door. Once the heavy doors groaned shut, leaving them alone, Livia whispered, how much do you really know? Benjamin didn't answer immediately. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and steel. Livia, tell me what happened to you. Tell me how you became this. Perhaps I can help you break free from the church's distorted will. Livia shook her head, her white hair dull in the dim light. I am the church, Benjamin. We are one now. Tell me what you know. I know that this cathedral is built upon a relic of the Witch Empire, Benjamin said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous vibration. A resurrection facility. I know you are conducting live experiments on the chosen, injecting them with holy blood and watching them suffer. It violates every doctrine you claim to hold. He stared directly into her guilty eyes. Tell me, Livia, how did the woman who once stood for the oppressed become this? Outside the city of Holy Spring, the night wind howls through withered trees, stirring the frozen ground. A four-wheeled carriage waits, its horses huffing white plumes of steam into the icy air. The chosen ones, recently liberated from the horrors of the underground prison, gather in the shadows. They have reached a consensus. They will flee to Frosttown. In this era of chaos, only the United Commune offers the network they need to survive. And besides, they all owe Benjamin Blackwood a debt that can never truly be repaid. Aphrodite stands apart. Yolia looks at him, his voice tight. Are you sure you want to stay? Aphrodite nods slowly. He hands Yolia a heavy package wrapped in thick velvet. Inside lies a vial of holy blood and the grim records of the laboratory. Go, Aphrodite commands. Find Sullivan and Chesvia. Tell them everything, word for word. Yolia grips the package, his eyes flashing with a bitter, helpless rage. To make Baron Blackwood sacrifice himself for us, it is an insult to the goddess. Do not waste time on self-blame, Aphrodite counters, his voice heavy with suppressed emotion. Completing the mission is the only help you can give him now. The whip cracks and the carriage vanishes into the dark northern wilderness. Aphrodite remains. He stays not out of blind heroism, but to send a message. He wants the Pale Church to know he is watching from the shadows, and if they harm Benjamin, he will not hesitate to stain this holy land with blood. Meanwhile, deep within the Pale Cathedral, the air is suffocating. Livia, the high-ranking nun and de facto ruler of the territory, stands before her prisoner, Benjamin Blackwood. Her back is hunched, her fingertips are white. In a voice barely audible, she whispers, "Forgive me, Benjamin." Benjamin does not look like a prisoner. He calmly takes a crisp bite of a red apple, chewing slowly as he watches her. "Forgive you," he asks through a smirk, "for the poor hospitality, or for watching civilians die of famine while you hide behind these walls, or perhaps for the inhumane experiments you've conducted in the name of a goddess whose doctrines you have utterly betrayed." Livia trembles. Benjamin leans forward, his voice dropping to a low, piercing tone. "You don't want my forgiveness, Livia. You want a clear conscience. You want to tell yourself that if Benjamin forgives you, then your sins were somehow necessary." He shakes his head. "The problem is, you know you are wrong, yet you have no intention of changing. So tell me, can you forgive yourself? And if the believers outside knew their leaders were the ones blaspheming the goddess, what do you think they would do?" Livia makes a suppressed, gurgling sound, a broken note of despair, as the weight of his words crushes her silence. The horse-drawn carts speed north along the commune's main road, their wheels churning through frozen ruts and lingering snow. Inside the carriage, the frantic energy of the escape from Holy Spring City has faded, replaced by a heavy, unsettling silence. Yolia leans back, watching the dark wasteland rush past the window. He is entering Frosttown, a place whispered to be a miracle of the Northwest. It is the heart of the United Commune, the home of cold-resistant seeds and the legendary fortress of Benjamin Blackwood. But Yolia feels no excitement, only a cold, gnawing dread. He carries a message that could shatter this peace. Their lord, Baron Blackwood, is currently a captive of the Pale Church. Suddenly, a companion gasps, pushing open the ventilation window. "My goddess, look at this." Yolia leans out and the sight steals his breath. In the deep midnight, a fire dragon of thousands of lanterns and torches winds across the horizon. A massive tide of refugees, families carrying bundles, carts piled high, moves in an orderly crawl toward the gates. So many people, his companion whispers. The driver calls out over the wind, registration and quarantine. Thousands are fleeing the south to seek refuge here. It seems Minister Suleiman will be working through the night. The carriage bypasses the lines, entering the core of Frosttown. Yolia stares in awe at the orange glow of streetlights, the towering chimneys of the workshop district, and the rhythmic hum of steam engines. The guilt in his chest tightens. How can he tell these people their protector is gone? They are ushered into a somber reception room. Moments later, the door swings open. A woman strides in. Her hair is a striking moonlight white, her eyes sharp and aloof. Enough with the small talk, she demands, her voice cutting through the air. Where is our lord now? This is Minister Chesvia, the Baron's most trusted advisor. Yolia's throat goes dry. He looks to his companions for help, but they all avert their eyes, leaving him alone. Yolia clears his throat and begins the harrowing tale. He describes how Lord Benjamin stayed behind to buy them time, how he was invited into the Pale Church's sanctuary. As he speaks, he hands over a sealed package. Chesvia's expression shifts from anxiety to a cold, dark fury. When he finishes, she slams her chair back, the legs screeching against the stone floor. Ha, she barks, her chest heaving. What on earth is he thinking? Is his brain filled with alcohol? Does he think he is some infallible chess player? Holy Spring is a den of madmen, and he just walked right in. Just then, the door opens again. A well-dressed man with heavy dark circles under his eyes, Minister Suleiman, enters with a weary smile. Minister Chesvia, please, calm down, our territory is thriving. Chesvia whirls on him, her voice a thunderclap. Benjamin Blackwood, our lord, has been captured by the Pale Church. The smile freezes on Suleiman's face. He blinks, his mind refusing to process the words. You, what, who was hurt? Chesvia steps close and shouts directly into his ear. I said, our lord has been taken. Time stands still, the color drains from Suleiman's face, his legs buckle and he collapses backward, hitting the carpet with a heavy, hollow thud. Sullivan stood tall, his initial shock hardening into a cold, administrative resolve. He leaned heavily on his guards for a moment before issuing his first command. Do not spread the word about the Lord being detained by Holy Spring territory. The room was thick with tension. Sullivan and Chesvia had just heard the full, harrowing report from Yolia, the secret resurrection facilities, the Pale Church's persecution of the Chosen Ones, and the devastating news that Benjamin Blackwood, the very soul of Frosttown, was now a captive. Sullivan's mind raced. He didn't fear a rational negotiation. He feared religious fanatics, madmen who followed divine pronouncements instead of logic. Chesvia, sensing his dread, spoke up with a doctor. Why calculated calm? The worst-case scenario is unlikely, she remarked. The Lord is a baron, and he has an old flame over there named Livia. I imagine he's quite comfortable. That is not true, Yolia retorted, his voice trembling with heat. Sister Livia participated in those experiments. She has parted ways with the baron. Chesvia raised a hand to quiet him. It was a joke, Bishop, but their past is an invisible buffer. As long as Livia has a trace of affection or a shred of political common sense, the Lord's life is guaranteed. Sullivan nodded. He looked around the room at the gathered corps members, Walter, clad in heavy armor, Evelyn, the grave intelligence chief, and Sarah, the administrative deputy. The Baron put me in charge for a reason, Sullivan declared, his voice gaining speed. He turned to Walter, whose hand was white-knuckled on his sword hilt. Minister Walter, do not march south. A full-scale attack would be a declaration of war. It would collapse our alliances and put the Lord in even greater peril. Sullivan stepped toward the map. Holy Spring territory is wealthy, yes, but it is small. It relies entirely on imports for food and fuel, and currently, he paused for emphasis, it is surrounded by our united commune. A predatory glint appeared in his eyes. They have grown dependent on our cold-resistant crops and our fuel. If they want to play the role of jailer, then we shall play the role of the winter. He looked at Chesvia, who finished his thought with a sharp smile. We cut off their supply. Exactly, Sullivan whispered. Not just food, but fuel. Without it, their believers will not survive the night. We will draft a secret letter to every merchant in the commune. Suspend all exports to Holy Spring. We will freeze them out. until they have no choice but to give him back. The air in the war room was thick with tension. Walter, the military minister of Frosttown, stood in the corner, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Is that all?" he demanded. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. The Pale Church had detained their lord, their very flag, and the response was merely commercial maneuvers and confidential letters. Sullivan, the territory's strategist, countered sharply. He explained that for a place like Holy Spring territory, which relied entirely on external trade, these small measures were enough to cripple them, but Walter wouldn't have it. He stepped forward, his voice rising to a roar. "It's too weak, they have harmed our lord. We should show strength, a heavy blow to make them feel fear, not hide behind ledgers like cowards." As the two men prepared to clash, Chesvia signaled to Evelyn. In a blur of motion, Evelyn seemed to split in two. One version of her pressed Sullivan back into his chair, while the other stood before Walter. The invisible pressure of her mind blade silenced the room instantly. "Sit down, everyone," Chesvia commanded. Suddenly she winced, clutching her forehead as a flash of pain crossed her face. After a few breathless seconds, her expression shifted from agony to a sudden, piercing clarity. She looked at Sullivan, her tone cold and scrutinizing. She accused him of being too cautious, too afraid for Benjamin's life to take a real risk. "Think about the intelligence," she urged. "The forbidden experiments, the mass imprisonments. Benjamin didn't name us to handle his release. He wants far more than that." She paused, her next words hitting the room like a hammer blow. "What he wants is the Holy Spring territory itself." A deathly silence fell. Sullivan's eyes widened as the realization took hold. He stood slowly, admitting he had been blinded by worry. This wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to seize the enemy's heart. Within days, a media storm erupted across the royal territory. Rumors turned into public accusations, spreading through taverns and markets. The narrative was set. Baron Benjamin was a hero, a man who had discovered a religious scandal so deep it shook the foundations of faith. Then came the iron. Led by the lords of the United Commune, a formal condemnation was issued. Armies began joint military exercises on the borders of Holy Spring, and trade agreements were threatened with cancellation. The trap was set, and the world was watching. The Holy Spring territory has descended into absolute chaos. Rumors, carefully crafted and dangerously half-true, spread like wildfire through the streets. The whispers are everywhere. The church is hiding a scandal. They are detaining benevolent nobles. They have blasphemed the very goddess they serve. As food prices soar and fuel supplies vanish, panic has taken root. The Pale Church attempted to strike back, claiming Baron Benjamin Blackwood was detained for aiding heretics in a violent attack. But the public isn't buying it. Anonymous leaflets, appearing like ghosts in the night, refute every word. They claim the Baron's accomplices were actually rescuers, saving the innocent from the church's secret underground dungeons. High above the grand square, two figures watch the gathering mob. Sassoon, a high-ranking monk of the hidden church, stands beside the cloaked Aphrodite. Sassoon murmurs a question. "Is this all right?" Aphrodite nods slowly. The hidden church provided the intelligence, but Aphrodite provided the muscle, silencing the church knights and inquisitors who dared to investigate too closely. But the most fatal blow isn't the rumors, it is the cold. A commercial coordination order from Frosttown has choked off all fuel. No coal, no firewood. In the homes of the poor, the fires are dying, and the winter chill is cutting through their remaining trust in the church. Inside the Pale Cathedral, the air is thick with desperation. High-level cultivators slam their fists on tables. Their messengers are being intercepted, their knights are stretched thin, their people are questioning them. In the streets, it is like ghosts are fighting us, one monk cries out. Amidst this storm, Benjamin Blackwood sits in a comfortable armchair, casually eating an apple. He looks bored. When a hot-tempered monk bursts in, screaming of divine punishment and calling him a devil, Benjamin simply takes another bite and chews, slowly. Once the room is cleared, only Livia remains. She is pale, trembling, and exhausted. She sits across from her prisoner and whispers the same plea she has uttered a dozen times. "Please, please forgive us." Benjamin sighs, leaning back. "Livia," he says, his voice dripping with a deep, weary helplessness. "What exactly am I forgiving? The bad apples, or the things you've done that are far heavier, things you can't even bring yourself to say out loud?" Livia does not look up, she only trembles, as the muffled roar of the angry crowd rises outside the window. Benjamin did not answer Livia's plea for forgiveness immediately. He simply looked at her, his eyes showing neither anger nor sarcasm. Livia, he began slowly, do you still think this is just a conflict between you and me? Be smart, you need to think for yourself. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on her bewildered eyes. Perhaps I ignited the fire, but once the wind takes shape, my will no longer matters. You cannot control the forces within the Pale Church that are forcing you into the abyss. He warned her that many were waiting to divide the spoils and drag the church from its pedestal. Livia stood up abruptly, her voice trembling. This was a last resort, she cried. She claimed they only wanted to combat the disaster, that she opposed the research on other chosen ones, her voice lowered into a helpless sob. By the time I found out, things were beyond repair. I'm sorry. I broke our vow to be heroes. Benjamin scoffed, his tone turning icy. How hypocritical, you made your choice through tacit approval. Now you only say these things to make yourself feel better. But we are companions, Livia retorted. If it were you, you would understand my predicament. Enough, Benjamin interrupted sharply. He walked to the window, turning his back to her. Forget about those old friendships, they have turned sour. Livia's voice rose in disbelief, clinging to the past, to the days of adventuring together. She even tried to use his own philosophy against him, pleading that they were a community with a shared future. Benjamin whirled around. Then what about me being locked up here? Is this how you treat your community? He pressed on, his voice rising. You want to maintain friendship, yet you participate in my imprisonment. The 7 Nights of Light are long gone. When Livia mentioned their old friends, Ella and Calvin, Benjamin's anger finally flared. Don't you dare mention them, especially Calvin, whose fate is unknown because of our inaction. Stop daydreaming, Livia. No one else thinks like this anymore. Desperate, Livia lunged forward, grabbing his arm. Don't send me away. I'll do anything to save the Holy Spring territory, anything. Benjamin looked down at her as she knelt on the floor. Anything, he repeated. Then reveal the truth, confess your crimes, hand over control of the territory to me. Can you do that? Livia's lips trembled. She had no answer. Benjamin pulled away, shaking off her hand. He looked at her one last time, his eyes devoid of gentleness. You, he said quietly, are only thinking about yourself. He turned and walked into the depths of the room, leaving the broken, white figure collapsed on the ground behind him. Livia wandered aimlessly through the cathedral like a white ghost, her mind a hollow void. The only sound echoing in her ears was Benjamin's final, cutting indictment. You're the kind of person who only thinks about yourself. A swarm of anxious monks suddenly flooded the hall, their voices a cacophony of panic. Sister Livia, the crowd outside is breaching the perimeter. Lord Blackwood refuses to speak. Our fuel is failing. Frostbite is spreading through the wards. Livia stared at them through a thick pane of glass. Their urgency meant nothing. The survival of the Holy Spring territory, the very safety of her people, could not stir a single ripple in her heart. She was consumed by a solitary, selfish cycle of thought. How can I get Benjamin to forgive me? How can I go back to the past? A cruel voice whispered from deep within, even now you are only thinking of yourself. The weight of her failures crushed her. She should have refused the dangerous orders from above. She should have stopped the blasphemous experiments in the sanctuary instead of hiding behind the lie of necessary evil. She should have been honest with Benjamin, instead of imprisoning him to save her own image. A tall figure suddenly blocked her path, Percival Blackwood. His voice, muffled behind his visor, was thick with disdain for his younger brother. Sister, you look unwell. Did Benjamin hurt you again? He is only trying to shake your resolve. Livia didn't hear his comfort. She only heard 2 words, younger brother. She lunged forward, grasping at Percival like a drowning woman. Percival, you are his blood. He will listen to you, she cried, her voice sharp with desperation. Please, tell him I know I was wrong. Tell him I'll do anything if he just makes the people outside stop. Percival froze. The absurdity of the request, asking the man who helped detain Benjamin to now beg for his mercy, left him utterly speechless. Meanwhile, in a secluded corner of the city, Benjamin's mind remained sharp. Through a telepathic link, he spoke to Aphrodite with a dark, relaxed irony. I'm their hottest political bargaining chip now, he mused. Aphrodite watched the indignant crowds gathering in the square. I thought their faith was unbreakable, he remarked. Faith needs to be fed, Benjamin replied coldly. They are cold, are hungry and they believe their church has betrayed the goddess, and Livia, the one person who could calm them, is too broken to speak. Suddenly, Benjamin's mental fluctuations sharpened into a warning. "Wait," he signaled, "my brother is here." Percival did not want this. A thick, pitiful barrier of conflicting beliefs had long stood between him and his younger brother, Benjamin, but he had seen the hopeful glimmer in Sister Livia's eyes. He could not ignore her earnest pleas. Percival stepped into the house arrest room. The air inside felt colder, harder than the world outside. Benjamin sat by the window, casually perusing a dry church book by the fading light. "Benjamin," Percival began, his voice straining for the tone of a wise elder brother, "stop it." Benjamin didn't look up, he merely raised his eyelids, offering a dismissive glance. "You came all this way just to tell me that?" He closed the book with a flat thud. "Let me guess, Livia sent you, she can't handle it herself, so she's pushing you out to play the emotional card." "It has nothing to do with the nun," Percival snapped, perhaps too quickly. "I am speaking to you as your brother. If we stop now, it is not too late. Don't let things get out of control. It won't do anyone any good, and everyone will lose face." Benjamin looked puzzled. "Who is losing face, my dear brother? Before you try to persuade someone to surrender, you should figure out your bargaining chips. Instead, you bring me these empty, nonsensical threats. Does the pale church not teach logic?" "Negotiation?" Percival's voice rose to a shout. "You want to negotiate with the goddess? This is blasphemy. We are not making a deal with you." Benjamin waved a hand dismissively. All right, if you're just repeating the same old script, please leave. I have a date to think about tonight. I don't have time for sermons." Percival stood frozen. He realized then that his words were powerless. Benjamin's attitude was a smooth stone wall. Every appeal to family ties simply slid away. Percival fled the room. He spent the rest of the day hiding in his patrols, unable to face Livia's inevitable disappointment. Night fell. In the dormitory, Livia tossed and turned. She was exhausted, yet sleep remained out of reach. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the angry gazes of the crowd and heard Benjamin's cold, cutting words. "How can I get him to forgive me?" she wondered. "Does he remember nothing of our adventures together?" As her consciousness finally began to blur into a vulnerable, half-awake state, a voice resounded deep within her heart. "Livia." She jolted awake. It was Benjamin's voice, gentle, familiar, but the dark room was empty. "I am not Benjamin," the voice whispered. "Then who are you?" Livia asked her own heart. "I am another you," the voice replied, "the upright, kind version of you, the one who always wanted to be, but never could." Livia tried to defend herself, claiming she had always followed the goddess, but the voice interrupted. "True integrity begins with honesty. You are confused, Livia, you have strayed." "Then why do you sound like Benjamin?" she murmured. The voice paused. "Because you feel guilty, you crave his approval and fear his rejection. You have molded me into the voice that is most familiar and most painful." Livia felt a wave of sadness. "I want him to forgive me. I want to go back to the past." "Then you must do more than talk," the voice urged, sounding more like Benjamin with every word. "You have ignored what he truly cares about. You have hesitated." "Tell me," Livia cried out internally. "What does he want? I'll do anything." The inner voice paused, then spoke with a chillingly familiar tone. "In this regard, we need to go through this together and think it over very carefully." The next morning, when Percival met Livia in the corridor after morning prayers, he almost thought he was seeing things. The nun had clearly visible light blue circles under her eyes, indicating she had not slept all night, but her mental state was completely different from the listless, spineless look she had worn just yesterday. Her steps were light, her eyes were bright, sparkling with an almost excited light. Her plain white nun's robe seemed to have regained its crispness, making her look radiant. "Percival," Livia called out, her voice filled with eager inquiry. "You've come at the perfect time. Tell me, what was Benjamin's favorite food when he was little, and did he have any favorite toys?" Percival's brow furrowed immediately. Why ask this? At this critical juncture, beset by fuel shortages and public discontent, she was concerned with such an old, forgotten matter. "Sister, that was a long time ago," he tried to gently remind her of her priorities, but before he could finish, he noticed the expectant light on Livia's face visibly dimming. An inexplicable pressure gripped him. I remember some things, Percival quickly corrected. Livia's expression brightened instantly. Percival took a deep breath and began to recall his impoverished childhood. In the past, our lives were very poor. Benjamin, he loved the pancakes his mother made with a little milk, wheat flour, and eggs. He would fry them until golden brown and sprinkle them with wild honey. Livia listened intently, nodding as she silently memorized the words, milk pancakes. And toys, she asked. Percival was even more bewildered. Sister, back then, our only toys were things we carved ourselves out of wood. Benjamin was very skillful. He could carve animals or wheels from fruit pits and wood scraps. He tried to bring the topic back to reality, but Livia's eyes burned with fervor. I believe the friendship between Benjamin and me has only developed some minor cracks, she insisted. I want to make it up to him, tenfold. Percival was dumbfounded. He watched as Livia became completely immersed in a redemptive world of her own making. I've made up my mind, Livia said. I will make the pancakes, and you will carve him a small gift by hand, then we will give them to him personally. He will feel our sincerity and forgive us. Percival's mind nearly stopped. Do I have to apologize too? Yes, Livia answered decisively, and if that doesn't work, we will kneel down before him together and beg for his forgiveness. Percival felt a cold sweat break out on his back. Do I have to kneel too? Yes, Livia replied as if it were a matter of course. She then turned and left the corridor with light steps, leaving Percival frozen in shock. After a full minute, an uncontrollable anger surged within him. This was not normal. How could she have become so childishly delusional overnight? Benjamin, Percival roared the name in his mind. It had to be him. He must have used seductive words to distort the nun's perception. Percival turned abruptly, striding angrily toward the cell where Benjamin was being held. Bang! The door to the house arrest cell was flung open with a violent thud. Percival stormed in, his gaze piercing Benjamin, who sat calmly by the window. What did you do to her? Percival's voice was forced out through clenched teeth. Benjamin slowly put down his book, looking up with an innocent expression. I am just a guest who can't go anywhere but read, he replied. Don't blame everything on me. Percival's fists clenched. It must be you. You instilled twisted thoughts in her. That is why she became like this morning. What happened? Benjamin asked with a smirk. She wouldn't have arranged for you to kneel and bow to me, would she? The joke hit the mark. Percival's cheek twitched violently. Benjamin's smile faded. Of course, it won't work on you. You are now a faithful servant of the Pale Church, a knight with no father or mother, only faith. Enraged, Percival lunged forward. His hand reached out like an iron clamp, grabbing Benjamin by the neck and lifting him off the chair. Benjamin's breath hitched, but he did not show fear. Before Percival could do more, 2 church guards rushed in, struggling to pull him away. Percival, leave immediately, one guard shouted, shielding Benjamin. No one is to be disrespectful to Lord Blackwood. This is a clear order personally given by Sister Livia. Percival was stunned. He was forced to leave, his frustration burning. Outside, a monk whispered to him, Sir Percival, Sister Livia requests that you meet her. Percival suddenly realized he had forgotten his promise to Livia. He had failed to prepare the handmade gift she requested. When he arrived, Livia was waiting with a basket of warm pancakes. She seemed different, softer. She ignored his failure and led him back to Benjamin's cell. There, she offered the pancakes to Benjamin with a warm, nervous smile. I made these especially for you. Benjamin took a bite. Bit too much oil, he remarked, but the taste is all right. Livia beamed, but Benjamin's next words were cold. Livia, you don't naively think our problems can be repaired with a basket of pancakes, do you? Livia's smile froze, panic and hurt filled her eyes. Of course not, she cried. Then, to Percival's horror, Livia began to bend her knees as if to kneel before Benjamin. Sister, mind your manners, Percival shouted. Livia snapped her head toward him, her gaze piercing. Shut up. Benjamin dismissed them calmly, claiming he needed rest. Livia straightened up, her face a mask of forced composure. As she walked past Percival, she muttered coldly, Come with me, I have something to tell you.